There we go. Alright. Alright. Think we're all set up here? Chat's gonna be a weird one. I'm gonna have to, pop this out. Have to find a place to put chat along with all, okay. I think what we're gonna do is I'm gonna pop out chat. I'm gonna put you here between all this other stuff with GIMP. Yeah. So that way I can see you guys clearly while I do the analysis. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna have to move the microphone, so let me do that 1 sec. Okay, I think that's all done. Let me make sure you guys can still hear me. I think we should be good. Yeah, Mike's looking fine. We're fine. How are we doing, everybody? Hey, Pedro. Howdy, Xavier. Oh, no timeline stuff. Yeah, I know. This is gonna be a fun stream. Hello, nobody. How we doing? Playing the DLC with an imp build this time currently. Coolio. Nice. Oh. Let me make sure I can see everything. Yeah, so I'm good, bro. Good. Now, as you guys can see here, I hope it's yeah, as you can see the zoom-ins and stuff. Okay, so we got ourselves a nice little timeline here. I extended the thing, so we're just gonna put stuff in the column. It's not gonna be trying to put it in order of all this stuff here, right? We're gonna instead focus on just, like putting it under a list here. So so if I put something like, oh no, that's not the color we want. You know what? Actually, I can do this in advance. So, 1 second. Let me make this yellow. There we go. So we can make this as column A. We should do this all caps lock. Column A, right? Column B. Oh, God. Did I not set this up? Thought I set this up so all of them would be. Oh my God. Okay. Nope. Oh my God. Me and technology. What's popping with me? As you can see, just this really. I've been working on the School of Mensis thing. I might have a new draft up soon. Okay, you know what? I'm just gonna type this, and then we're gonna adjust the color again here. Column C. There we go. All right. Okay. So we should be. Let's move this here. There we go. Alright, so we should be able to quite clearly be able to decide what we want here. So we're going to go over stuff we see in the DLC, and we're going to have the help of the screenshots I took for the DLC, right? I have some of these here, so going to go over some of this stuff, but we are going to limit it, okay? We are, in fact, going to limit it to only stuff that's relevant to the Godfrey and America timeline. Now, it could be anything happening within that timeline, and it's not like going to be this fast and loose thing where we're like, okay, this definitively happened at this point. It's just going to be like, okay, based on what we have and what we're looking at and what we know, when most likely something like this happened. Like, say, Devonia, right? Like, we don't know when exactly Devonia, or is it Devonia or Denovia? I forget which one it is, but however you're supposed to say his name. That longest-serving Crucible Knight, right? Whenever he happened, then we're going to, like, say, okay, he happened in, I don't know, column C or something. Like, that's when he probably left, to do his own thing in the realm of shadow, right? Is that true or not? Maybe not. Just want to go over that. Yeah, I wanted to do this with the game in the background instead, but I decided against it. I was like, oh, yeah, no. My controller, ever since I beat the game, thankfully it waited until I beat the game, but yeah, controller's been a little weird with the wires, so now I'm looking into getting like a Bluetooth wireless plug-in, see if I can use that with my PC thing, and then we can have everything done without having to worry about wires. Because I get the feeling, I think the problem is that a lot of these controllers are designed for you to just plug them in and then leave them sitting there without touching them for them to charge. So me regularly using them with the wire plugged in and stuff, like a wired controller, has caused the little metal stuff to get loose. Because that seems to always be the reason why there's problems I have with the plug-in, right? Where it's not, like, connecting or it constantly drops or whatever. I have to unplug it and replug it back in. Like, that seems to be always the problem. So I'm thinking if I just get the Bluetooth thing, and I'm going to use that on this controller, if that works, great. If not, I'm going to have to buy a new controller, unfortunately, but we'll try it. When Mesmer's born, for example. Yeah, like, for example, if we say Mesmer's born here, that'd be fine. Now, I will say, this whole Horaloo becomes Godfrey and stuff, I am willing to put, like, some of the Godfrey history stuff that's not strictly related to America in here, just for the sake of, it's just so directly pertinent to the Godfrey-America relationship, it's worth, like, kind of including stuff. But, and we might create a new column just for, some of the hornsent stuff, depending on how this goes. So we'll just have to see. Hard to say, especially since we don't have dates. Yeah, like, for example, let's actually start with that. Let's put, like, obviously, we have to assume that Mesmer was born no earlier than somewhere during this era. Now, could it be earlier than this? Yes. So, Mesmer is born, right? So, this is as early as we can put it among these three columns, right? I'm pretty sure, and the reason is because, Mesmer's purge. Now, I assume, based on what we know, I'm also going to open... Let's see if this works, chat. 1 second. Let's see if you guys can see this. So, gonna... Elden Ring, FromSoft graphics. Okay. Is it showing this stuff? No. Okay, it's not showing these graphics. Unfortunate. Unfortunate. Okay, what if I do this, though? Will it show this? Alright, so it'll show this one, but it won't show... It won't show any of this. Okay. I don't know why that's a thing. I'm gonna have to make it a separate thing, then. Okay, let me see if I can add this, then. Add... display capture, photo, graphic, oh, what are you showing this for? That's all we want to do. Alright, wrong thing I clicked. Okay, that's why. Add, not game capture, where is it? Window capture, there we go. Create new one. Window capture, photo, graphic. Well, that one could work. That one could work there. But that's not exactly what I want. So let's hide that for the time being while I try to figure this out. Can we make it show... Not the Erdtree timeline. Window... Automatic. I have no idea. Match title otherwise found. Match title must watch. Let's see. So see, it's picking that, but I want to pick this. Ooh. Yeah, I don't know how this is unfortunate. I don't know how I did this the first time, and I don't know why it's not picking this up when I have a photo already. So maybe if I close the photo thing and try this then? Nope. Ah, darn. Alright, so I think we're just going to have to do it like this then, right? If this is what's decided... Oh, no. Well, yes, but this is not the focus I want on. If it's decided, okay, it's going to focus on this, then yeah, sure, we'll do this, and then I'll just highlight these like this then. I don't like doing it like that, to be honest, but it is what it is. It is what it is. So we'll do that for now. There we go. That fair, chat? And I guess we can do it something like this, right? So I can show it in slightly bigger. God, this is so scuff. There we go. All right, let's see what chat's going off on. Oh my god. The problem is I can't do okay, so I need to 1 second. Let me go to the screenshots. Really? Really? Now you can't see this? Huh? Like what? Oh, I'm so confused now. Now it's not working like we had it earlier. There we go. Now. All right. Okay. We just have to do it like this, where we have this frame open. Oh, this is not gonna work. Oh no, it'll work fine. I just have to minimize this sometimes, right? Yeah. Okay. There we go. Loki tech shenanigans. Yeah, I know, right? Crazy. Because the Lord of Bestowed Talisman at Shadowkeep has Godfrey in his armor. Yes, so let's look at this real quick. Where's the talis? I haven't organized these and divided them by their section and put them in the relevant folder, which I probably should at some point, but where's talismans on here? Here. So we have a bunch of stuff, right? We have a lot of these, like these old Godfrey talismans. These are like supposed to be like for the oldest ones or whatever, right? So that's a huge factor to consider. Another thing we have to consider is, like you said, this as well. Another thing that associates it with the Age of Plenty and stuff like that. Like, this one is more so with the fingers and stuff, so this isn't too relevant. But, yeah, here we go. The bestowal right here. So we have Godfrey in his full armor, showing him receiving some of the amber of the doing so. So, again, we have this generic talisman, right? And we have the, we get the original one in the base game, right? Which I think is, I forget what color the gem is in that one, but this one is like the focus version of that, which makes sense, right? Similar to how we have cerulean flasks and stuff. So it's very clear that the amber can focus on both physical or mental healing. Or recovery, I guess would be the more accurate term to use there. But then you have, on top of that, this, which shows specifically Godfrey receiving it. So it's something that's making abundantly clear that there's a close association with Godfrey. Now, does anyone remember where exactly we get this? I want to say it's on one of Mesmer's camps, but I can't recall if that's accurate. So correct me if I'm wrong. The Land of Shadow being veiled would have been after the Night of the Black Knights because of the Prince of Death faces. I don't think that's necessarily true, because there's also been a question in regards to Farum Azula, and this has been something that's dogged the Farum Azula for a while. Does this mean that Farum Azula going in the sky didn't occur until after until after the events of the Night of the Black Knives, or does the roots of the Erdtree, wherever they happened, already exist in the land of Farum Azula, and thereby, by extension, the rot of Godwyn has also spread there, right? Like, it happens, I don't want to say supernaturally, but sort of like the idea being that just because it happens through the root network, it's not purely like it's spreading along a physical root network, so much as it is infecting the substance of the Erdtree itself, which is why it can be so inconsistent with its spread to some degree, and also be, although it's somewhat based on proximity, like we see with that minor Erdtree right above Godwyn, right? But also because it's, it can spread without having like a physical connection. So you have like a Erdtree route, which is on lands between, but then up flying in the sky of Farum Azula, there's a disconnected Erdtree route, and then Godwin's still able to spread there. This has always been the question plaguing Godwin, and it's the same thing that you can say about the Realm of Shadow, that the events of the Realm of Shadow happened a long time ago, but the Shadow Tree, being a reflection of the Erdtree, is causing Godwin's corruption to not just affect the Erdtree, but also the Shadow Tree's roots, right? So it'd be like, okay, it happens in one dimension, it's going to happen now in the other, because this isn't just about, like, the physical plane of the lands between, of reality as we understand it. This is happening on a more, what's the word? More cosmological level, for the lack of a better term. Yeah, Farum Azula, yeah, Pedro's bringing up the Farum Azula thing. Well, maybe there's the blue amber and starlight shards. Blue amber? Where are these blue amber shards? Or are we just talking about blue amber like the Erdtree's blue amber? Like, what's the difference between that and the starlight shards? Just want to make sure. Because I don't remember if we receive any new starlight shard type item, right? Because we have the amber starlight in the base game, right? And that seems to be associated with the demigods and stuff, right? I'm not seeing this. Joining just now, is it possible that the Erdtree's roots still access the Land of Shadow to some extent? Perhaps that's why Grace can even still exist in the Land of Shadow, like the tree avoids being severed by the veil. No, that wouldn't, like... Nightscat, if you're arguing that the idea of the Shadow Tree's roots would be essentially the same as the Erdtree's roots, then I would agree with you. But if you're just arguing with the idea that something separate from the Shadow Tree's roots, like the actual Erdtree's roots are invading, I would say probably not. Because the game makes it very clear that the gold and the grace comes from the shadow of the Shadow Tree itself. And that, in fact, it's because it's shadow that there's so much gold to it. There seems to be the underlying idea that shadow is more fundamental than gold, right? Like, it's sort of like the shadow. How should I describe this? You know how an object casts a shadow, right? So there's always a shadow behind something and the light that's on it, right? Now, what if you make the argument, then, that shadow behind it is actually the fundamental thing, and the actual item that has the light coming off of it, right, is the projection or the derivative, right? So it's not that the shadow derives from the object because of how it's, cast over the blank space, but the opposite way around, right? That's, I think, what they may be going for with the idea of it. And it makes sense if we're going with the idea that the Greater Will, of course, sends down the golden star of the Elden Beast that becomes the Elden Ring, right? And that golden star coming from the Greater Will, if the Greater Will is fundamentally the darkness of space, right? I'm just referring to the talisman, which also regenerates FP over time. Oh, okay. So that would be, where is that talisman? Somewhere down here, right? Where is it? I know I saw it earlier. Yeah, so this one, this one, right? Because the other one heals you constantly, and this one heals your FP constantly. What would be the difference between this and the Starlight, huh? That's actually a good question, because I don't... Because we're told that the Amber Starlight Shard is amber colored, but we're never told it's amber itself, though there's obviously supposed to be the comparison between the gold of the golden lineage and the demigods and, the Elden Ring, everything deriving from America, the holiness, and the Erdtree, right? But yeah, we also use it to make the droughts, which affect the fates and stuff, right? I don't know if this amber, though, is affecting fate in that regard. I meant the actual Erdtree's roots. Yeah, then I have to disagree there. America's unlikely to be veiling the Land of Shadow to hide her past just before breaking the Elden Ring. That I agree with. I find it incredibly unlikely that the events involving Mesmer and stuff happen so late in the timeline. And stars are the amber of the cosmos. That's true. We do get a line like that. That is very true. Yeah, but there's a very big difference, of course, when we're talking about like something being the color of amber and something being described as amber itself. But yeah, same idea. We also have glintstone referred to, and people. We have to keep this in mind. People are also referred to as stardust. Now you have to keep in mind the Japanese for stardust more literally means something like star debris. So, you know, it's kind of like, you know, the leftovers, the waste, you know, the broken off pieces of a star, right? So it's a little bit more than just being like, oh, you're the dust, right? In that sense, right? So it could be, ooh, that's cool. It could be being more metaphorical when it's talking about people, but at the very least, we have this idea that glintstone is treated as quote unquote stardust, which makes sense, right? It's essentially star debris, right? It's like it's what's left over after a star crashes into the earth, right? You have all this, you know, quote unquote, you know, I don't know if I describe it as space debris, but you know, it's the same idea. You have all this stuff that's kind of like embedded into the earth that was once part and piece of a star. And there seems to be the idea that people are at least similar in the same vein, and that they also ultimately derive from stars. And as Ymir points out, it's like, oh, we are all children of the greater will, which makes sense because presumably the greater will, if greater will is responsible for all the stars, and stars are at least in some way responsible for the creation of man, whether it's like the Elden star or whatever. You know, that just makes sense as a philosophical talking point. Like at least as rhetoric, it's sensible. I'm trying to find this thing. Let me make sure I'm not missing you guys in chat. Yeah, again, the Land of Shadow stuff, we have to assume that the Land of Shadow stuff has to happen relatively early in the timeline. Again, I still think there's always a problem with whenever you have this stuff happen, because, like, there should be, like, it's an entire landmass that just up and disappears. Like, I don't know how you manage to, like, erase, like, like, what, like... I don't know what you're supposed to, like, erase or attempt to hide. It's like, oh, there's this landmass with this giant tower on it that anyone could see from anywhere on the lands between. Like, who is America trying to hide this from? Her own people? Like, I don't know. It's one of those things where it feels like it draws more attention to it than otherwise. But hey, what do I know? I'm not the writers, right? All right, back to looking through this. You know what? It's a talisman, isn't it? So it should be down here. So I must have missed it. This isn't it. No. Where is it? Come on, come on. Am I crazy, chat? Isn't what Ymir give you a talisman? Or do I just not remember what it looks like? I could have swore it showed like a fingers holding the glintstone, right? Huh. Closer to the top, maybe? Item. Maybe it's a consumable? I don't remember. That's the nail. Oh my goodness. You passed it? Oh, I did pass it? It's a key item. Okay, it's a key item. Oh, that's why. Okay. Okay. Let me go back down then. I must have missed it. Where are keys and key items? No, it's not this. It's not any of this. This is armor and stuff. Oh, wait. No. This is weapons and stuff. Okay. These are incantations and stuff. So these are keys and key items. So, no, these are materials now. So it's somewhere down here that I missed it. So we have this, which is the whole thing with the fingers. You sure it's... It's the hand talisman, middle column. Is it? Is it this? Wow, I really forgot how it looked like. You know what? I bet you I'm confusing it in my head with, where is it? The finger the finger talisman here. I bet you that's what happened. I'm thinking of it like this. So I think it's like, I thought about this, but smaller. But yeah, I guess maybe it's this then. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's the one the Ymir gives you? Okay, yeah. could have been threatened to silence. Again, the problem is that you have this idea where, especially considering the notion of removing the destined death and all that stuff, like, everyone's alive, everyone, like, most of the characters who would be alive during the time to be able to remember or speak about these events in the realm of shadow are still alive and around, like the Crucible Knights, like, so many figures and stuff are, in fact, here, so it's like, it makes such a weird notion that America's actually going to be able to hide anything, especially when, like, it's so obvious. So, like, yeah, I just don't buy it, personally. But again, that's what the lore is, so. Did Miyazaki say in an interview that the Rune of Death is more related to the demigods? I'll be honest, I have no memory of anything like that, but if you can find the link, then sure. There's a few things that I thought that was stated, and I haven't been able to find an online link to it anymore, so. Like, I've been trying to find the thing, because I could have swore there was a mention somewhere during the promotion for the DLC that the Golden Order began with the creation of the Erdtree or whatever, which obviously would be the best evidence you can argue that the events of the Glowmite Queen incident has to happen before the Erdtree is created, which would mean that Melina has to exist as the Glowmite Queen before these events, which means that either A, Marika had children like Mesmer before the Erdtree was created, or B, Melina, as we know her, as Marika's daughter, was, like, quote-unquote, reincarnated after the fact, and whoever she was as Glowmite Queen was, like, someone completely separate or unrelated. Maybe it's her interpretation of her developing fundamentalism, like, to make her order more hygienic, she needs to hide the shadow behind it. The problem is that when this happens in the timeline, it's still too early for fundamentalism to exist. Now, I agree, it would be around the same time that, like, the seeds, which would sprout into fundamentalism, are being planted, and there's a lot of things that, that would go alongside with that, but, like, yeah, there's still some problems here. So, like, let's begin with another thing that we have to include here. So let's see, Mesmer is born, Mesmer's purge, we also need to now also factor in that, how do I put this, no, I'll add the Rellana stuff later, let's focus on just this here. Nobility's established, right? At the very least, nobility is established. We know this has to happen before the purge because a lot of the knights and soldiers and stuff who go with Mesmer come from these noble families. So we know that, also Erdtree has to be created, of course. Again, we don't know when this happens with, Mesmer, but let's put Mesmer's birth, like, Mesmer is born. Erdtree is created, right? So somewhere in this timeline, Erdtree is created, right? And then the nobility is established because there's an Erdtree nobility and all that stuff that Mesmer soldiers and people are dressing for, the purge for. So it's like, all that has to happen. Couple of Fire Knights use an Erdtree incantation, Wrath from Afar. The thing with the Erdtree, that Erdtree incantation in particular, is it's supposed to have been discovered after Marika shattered the Elden Ring, which is fine because, like, her shattering the Elden Ring affects the Erdtree and the Shadow Tree both. So obviously, with their castle at the foot of the Shadow Tree, they're going to notice the whole it's very obvious that they're at least suspicious of Marika abandoning them, even if they don't know the full story. Like, they're at least being like, okay, we've been here forever, and now the Erdtree's, like, something's going wrong with the Erdtree. Like, this isn't supposed to happen. Which only makes sense in my mind if we are, if we're considering, yeah, it only makes sense in my mind if we consider that the Erdtree and the Crucible and stuff, like, maybe even the very beginnings of the Crucible starting to decline and disappear was happening around the time that this purge is happening. Can't say that for absolute certain, but that may have been, like, at the start. Any insight into why hornsent guys and Fire Knights are hanging out together and collaborating, killing the player in the Specimen Storehouse? We find hornsent shadow scholars, right? And these are the same ones we find in the ruins. So the best I can think of, based on what we know, is that So Mesmer and his forces are going around killing everything, like I should say killing everyone, but burning down every hornsent settlement and you know, remnant of their culture that they can find in there, right? Now, obviously, we just see the areas in ruins and, like, the quote-unquote survivors are left to do their stuff. So, again, there's a lot of writing criticisms I can have about the DLC on that front, but, like, you know, I'm going to put that aside. The idea is that, okay, Mesmer's going through and he's, like, thoroughly purging everyone and everything related to the hornsent. But when they get to the Rao ruins, several of the Fire Knights under, what was it, the Wise Men? I forget what his name was. Wego or something. He is like, hey, no, this is good history. This is important. Let's keep this stuff and study it. So in that case, I would not be surprised if some of these scholars, whether or not they were already shadow people or stuff, I don't know. Even if they started killing all the archaeologists and scholars and stuff, if when it came to destroying the ruins, the Fire Knights under Wego or whatever his name was, were like, okay, we'll try to preserve this and study them for ourselves, and we'll take some of these guys as survivors to help us with our studies if they pledge their allegiance to us or something like that, right? Like, it's like, we're gonna kill you last, right? It's similar to the idea of, like, I don't know, like, U.S., during and after World War II, accepting some Nazis into their, you know, military research programs for, like, the atomic bomb and stuff like that. Because, like, it's okay, well, it's like, yeah, they were Nazis. Like, they were card-carrying Nazis. But you know what? We don't need to tell the public about that. Who's gonna know? Operation Paperclip, yeah. We go the Wise Man and Necromancer, yes. So that, I think, is where, the whole Shadow Hornsent archaeologist scholar stuff is coming from in the storehouse. Yeah, because we have to keep in mind that there's probably a lot of these scholars and stuff who they don't really care about what's happening to their people. They're scholars first and foremost, so all they care about is being able to study and understand the ruins. So if they're given the chance where they're not going to get, you know, purged like everyone else, if they just renounce their allegiance or whatever and promise to serve the Erdtree, you know, quote-unquote, ostensibly the Erdtree by doing this specimen research on Mesmer's behalf, like, sure, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people who are going to take him up on that, right? Like, they're not like these, you know, they're not going to be, like, super patriotic by, comparison to the, like, what are they called? The hornsent, warriors that we see, like, who are, like, getting possessed by birds. It's like, those are people who are like, okay, they're, like, deeply embedded into the religious culture there. So, yeah, of course, we're going to see them all either, we're seeing them all alive. Like, we don't see them as shadow people or anything, right? Like, I'm trying to think, is there ever a time where we see hornsent, let's actually include this. Recruits hornsent, scholars, right? Or we should, yeah. Mesmer recruits hornsent scholars from, sent scholars studying at Rao. There we go. So then, do we see any shadow people for the either the Divine Bird Warriors or the Horn Warriors in general? You see a Spirit Horn Warrior in Midra's mansion, I think. Okay, so that's the one example we can think of. So generally speaking, when we find them, they're still alive, right? So the only thing I can presume is that, again, this goes back to my question of how the hell are these guys at least not dying, gloriously defending their home and stuff while, you know, Ballarat's still in ruins and things. Like, why didn't Mesmer burn that thing to the absolute ground or whatever? Like, there's so many questions I have there. Like, why are we just sealing it or what? Like, God, there's so many questions that this all leaves. But anyway, point is like, okay, so they're burning everything down, but these warriors at least are still alive. So some of them at least seem to have managed to survive the purging, right? They're able to, I guess, fight off all of Mesmer's people by the time they have to, like, retreat or they move on or whatever, right? Yeah, no shadow ones outside of that. Gotcha. It's not shadow, though. It's a yellow/gold one. So it's a gold, as in a yellow/gold spirit? Okay. That's different then, so... because then you can make an argument that has to do with, like, Midra and the Frenzy Flame or something there. Yeah, right. If I recall correctly, no, the Shadowy Men in the Specimen Storage Tower are hornsent. Very similar mobs, but I think they don't have horns. Can someone go then in-game then and check real closely for me? It should be pretty easy if you can sneak up on them and then just look closely at their models to confirm firsthand so we can get a confirmation on that. If they're different models, then they're different models, and then we can just ignore the whole hornsent thing, but... Someone check for me, because like I said, controller's being weird for me, so I'm not going to do it myself. I'll believe you. So what else do we have to also include in here? Might want to open my, my notes for in a sec. What else could possibly be happening here? Well, obviously, okay, so Mesmer's purge begins. I'm just gonna leave it as Mesmer's purge because it's just a general, and it'd be hard to like get into specifics of when this stuff happens. Another thing we have to consider is Rellana gets recruit. No, well, let's see. Rellana goes to Rellana joins Mesmer. We'll just put that, right? So what we know is that Rellana has this fixation on going to help Mesmer, and in part wants to, you can always argue she didn't learn till later, until after she joins, right? But she's so dedicated to Mesmer, she's willing to try to help soothe his pain. And people have often interpreted this as implicitly romantic, in the same way that Rellana seems to fall head over heels for Ratigan. Yeah, I guess they really like the redheads. But when it comes to Rellana, it seems that Mesmer doesn't really know or trust her. We see that she has to prove herself by doing one of the dedicated fights to the Erdtree, which is the same fights, mind you. We have the shields, of course, right? So, these are the same fights that we see in... Where is it? Did I pass the shields already? I must have. Yeah, here we go. No. Shield. Huh. They don't have as many shields as I thought they would. Okay. Maybe it's further up then. Yeah, weird. Somewhere here? Also, the music's disappeared for a sec, so one moment, chat. Yeah, okay, the music ended, so let's do something a little different. Alrighty. I'm on to teach him on my way to Specimen Storehouse. I like my thing where I suggest that they like redheads because it reminds them of fire giants from their home. I like that idea as well, Xavier, and I think it could be a contributing factor at least. Like, they're like, oh, we're familiar with this thing, it reminds us of home. Could be. Could just be a fetish. So she goes off to fight for Mesmer before joining the House of the Erdtree and Carian. I can't imagine the conversation with Rellana. We have to keep in mind, and I go over this in my my analysis in Altus Unification War, right? Like, Rellana's rise to power is happening around the same time that America's rise to power is. Now, you can argue is it slightly earlier, because now, with new information we have, you could make an argument for the Farum colonies trying to invade Caria and Liurnia of their own volition. So rather than getting pushed out by Godfrey and his forces and being like, okay, we're going to try to escape to go here, they could be just outright hostile, or at the very least, like, unintentionally hostile, because they're going in to kill the dragons in Liurnia, right? Like, we have to keep that as a factor, that the reason why the Farum colony spread to the mountaintops and to Altus, and then later to Liurnia at Caria Manor before Rellana comes in and kicks butt, is all because they are trying, right, at least theoretically trying, to take over the land, as it were, right? They're trying to be able to spread around and actually focus on finding these lands where dragons are, and then exterminate them from there, and then they're like, okay, I guess we'll just live here then afterwards when the dragons are gone, right? Now, this is consistent with the dragon communion worms we find on Altus, at least. We don't find any in Liurnia, obviously, but again, it's very clear that the presence the Farum colonists had in there was very minor and very short-lived, so obviously they won't. This could also tie into why we have dragons that are that join up with Rellana, right, and make the oath and stuff, because then you have Rellana essentially gathering all these parties. So she has the Crystallians behind her, like she has old oaths with giants behind her, and now on top of all that, she's adding the dragons to there, because the dragons are fearful of getting, like, wiped out by these followers of the ancient dragons, right? You find the magma worm at the end of Runestream Precipice, right? Yeah, which is essentially, it's literally at Altus, right? Like, Altus is literally up the elevator, right? So it's like, it's clear that it's like hiding out in the ruins. which would tell us that, yeah, it's probably a runaway from Godfrey and Marika's thing, and it kind of just, you know, been hiding in the corners, and then obviously became a worm. So she goes off to, okay, I'm on the first floor. So far, I'm not seeing horns on them. So you don't see horns on them? Okay, good to know. Make sure you look very closely, though, because the horns were very small, and I couldn't see them at first either until I used the camera to get really close. So, like, make sure, like, you're sneaking up on them, you're really, like, looking around, getting that camera to, like, you know, peek at anything that might look like a bump or a little horn thing. Little horn point. Alright, so then, yeah, so looking at this here. Okay, all the stuff on hornsent culture. I find it interesting they have these models here because these models don't look like they're hornsent either. Correct me if I'm wrong. Which has me very curious about these two. And it makes me wonder how common hornsent actually were. If it was one of those things where, like, not everyone necessarily was born a hornsent. Because, again, you see it same here. Like, we don't see hornsent on any of these statues or anything in their culture here with any of their engravings or stuff. So I'm really starting to wonder if the horns that they were born with was something that everyone was born with, or it's just, like, it became the dominant trait in the culture. In part because it became an important showing of status. So if you didn't have horns, you were, you know, probably going to be bred out. Like, you weren't being, like, I'm not saying, like, they were, like, using eugenics or anything to, like, exterminate, but they were kind of like this thing where it was like, okay, you're not getting some compared to the guy that has the bigger horns, right? The guy that has horns versus the guy that has none. Because, again, we do see how the bigger the horns, the bigger the status you're allowed to have in hornsent society. Yeah, there we got the Bale. I'm still curious if this is supposed to be a naturalistic phenomenon or if we're supposed to believe that it's artificial. I have no, like, strong opinion on it either way, by the way. I don't know enough about geology to tell you, because this is apparently this should be like a volcano, right? Jagged Peak? Am I wrong? Oh, yeah, this is fun information, but O'Neill in Irish means grandson of Neil. Neil, which is the Angli version of the Irish name Neil, so he killed grandpa and grandson. And yeah, I've talked about, I think I referenced this in my, my analyses. I think it would be Radon and probably, yeah, it would at least be Radon, right? That Neil and O'Neill are obviously named in reference to each other, because it's like, okay, you have, like, the O'Neill, and you have, like, the basically, copy paste of O'Neill, but with, like, scars on his face. Or whatever. I forget which order it goes. I can't remember these names. I swear, babe, port size doesn't matter. Yeah, exactly. You might need to check their model name, because I think they might be wearing hats, and if you could, so you could argue they don't have them, so the horns don't clip the hat. Oh, that is true. That is true. It could be something like that, where they're trying to avoid clipping or something. But yeah, if someone, again, if you guys are checking that stuff out, again, feel free to, like, look into it, and, like, if you find even one that very clearly has horns, that's something that's worth, like, knowing. All right, so what else do we have to put under here? So going back to the Rennala thing, I don't have any screenshots or whatever of her fortress, unfortunately, it seems like. I didn't really explore that place again when we were running around. We'll have to do that next time when I get the controller stuff fixed. And I can't find her shield, unfortunately. Oh, here it is. Wow, it's under weapons, okay. It's under weapons, but under shields. That's so funny. I guess it's its own class, cool. Anyway, so, yeah, looking at these. Okay. Wait, what the hell? I found one place where Miyazaki mentions the demigods and the Rune of Death. The Overture of Elden Ring book has an interview with him. Full transcript is paywall, but Fandom has an extra. Oh, cool. Then I'll have to check that out later. The demigod's immortality stems from having the Tarnished are known to be immortal due to the guise of the grace. For demigods, the demigod's immortality stems from having their fated deaths removed from the Elden Ring. Yeah, but is it just the demigods? Because we see the same thing happening with all of America's people, right? With all of them being, like, zombified and stuff from the extensive living and things. So if you have anything on him commenting on that in general, that'd be good to know. Or if he's literally just about the demigods because they're the only thing that comes up in the interview. That's a very important distinction to make. Anyway. Oh, that's funny. They're wearing hats so the horns doesn't bother the more devout folks at the castle. I don't remember, but I think there is a description that says that Baal is what causes the eruptions. Baal is mentioned to, like, do something with the lava. I don't remember the exact wording, but I can't remember if it's supposed to be, like, this is supposed to be a volcano proper, like, it has lava by nature, and then Baal is, like, agitating it, or if he is causing, or he's the reason why there's lava. Like, is he the reason why Jagged Peak is the way it is? And I don't know enough about geology to know, like, what's going on with all the holes on the sides of his arena. Are those just burrows that the dragons carved out so they can sleep or something? I don't know. All of America's people presumably had the blessing of grace in their time. I'll keep looking. Yeah, but then you could argue the same thing with the demigods and stuff. So, like, why would then the removal of Rune of Death just affect them and not everyone else then? Because isn't that the whole point of removing the Rune of Death for your age of life then? All right, so but going back to Rellana, so we know that Rellana had to do the her own like little stunt with the Erdtree, like, dedicated ritual combat fights, right? That they're like, okay, I'm gonna do this, like, big battle where it's like, you know, it's not gonna be a serious battle where we risk our lives or whatever, right? But we have to go through this song and dance, essentially, reenacting, you know, the glories of the Erdtree, in its tribute. And then, it's the exact same thing that's talked about here. Where is it? Where's Talismans? There we go. Should be somewhere here. Nope. 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 I swear, chat, one of these days I just have to do power. There we go. Here's the sword talisman at least, right? So it's the same thing that's mentioned in these talismans, right? So these are all connected to Godfrey. So again, and there's even a point being made of how, despite the fact that this stuff died out in the lands between, the Mesmer and his forces are still carrying on this practice in the Realm of Shadow. All this only makes sense if the events of if Mesmer's purge and him going into the Realm of Shadow and essentially being sealed off from the rest of the world has become sort of a time capsule where they're just continuing these practices and things that were done during their day at the time, which are no longer done now because obviously the Age of the Plenty is over and the events of Radigan with fundamentalism have occurred, so like things are different, right? It's also why I think we have to say that perfumers are created. I also think that's why we have to say that the perfumers that are helping in Mesmer's purge also have to have existed at the time that the purge began. I don't think there's something that came in and migrated later. Now, there could be an argument that there are parties who came in later for the purge. I don't think you can say that about the perfumers, though. I think there's a huge problem if we're trying to say that in the middle of Radigan's era of peace and prosperity, you have the creation of perfumers as a separate, as like, you know, this new development in the priest class. And as part of that new development, the perfumers also discover all these fire arts and stuff, which should be like totally taboo. It makes more sense to me if it happens in the middle and in pursuit of Mesmer's purge, and then you have a lot more distance between, like, okay, you have like the end of the Age of Plenty era, and then you have the post Elden Ring shattering, you know, shattering war happening, and then the other perfumers who have lived through all that time of peace since, you know, between Mesmer's purge going up to the present day, like, they haven't had to participate in combat and stuff to the same degree. Plus, it makes sense if you have the perfumers going there for Mesmer's forces, if for no other reason than because they help keep the faith alive, even though they're never going to see the Erdtree again physically, right? Like, they're all just kind of trapped there doing their endless purging. They look like some form of ant or termite burrows, probably not a geological phenomenon. So the spark aromatic was made independently by the perfumers of Mesmer and of Lingdell. I don't know if independently would be the word, because all the supplies and materials used to make those aromatics have to come from Lingdell. Like, for example, let me include this. I think, Shadu, Altus, so Mesmer, let's see, how do I put this? Mesmer establishes foothold in Shadu Altus. I do not believe that the Erdtree Kingdom had any presence in the Shadow Altus, as it's called, before the events of Mesmer's Purge either. I think they established their foothold and, like, this is our base of operation, like, literally just before then. The reason I say that is because, one, we see none of the flowers or any of the foliage and stuff that we have associated with Altus, namely the Altus blooms, right? Also, the area's talked about how it's named after Altus, but there's also lots of so there's the idea that it's not necessarily Altus, but it gained the name of Altus after Mesmer and folks moved in. There's also talk about how Mesmer and company are, essentially, like, they're invaders, right? That they, took over the land. In fact, there's this very specific terminology that's used, and it was used historically, in Japan to refer to, like, regions of land that were essentially, like, sanctioned off. It's kind of like an economic zone, I would say, where it's like, we decided, like, okay, this is a place where we will allow foreigners to settle, have residency, trade, do whatever they need to or want for the purposes of, you know, whatever political or, you know, economic, goal that the Japanese government at the time had for it, right? So, like, for example, when the Dutch came, during the Edo era, right, if I recall correctly, there was only one port city open, even though Japan was isolationist, and they were like, okay, we will allow limited contact with the outsiders through this port. Otherwise, we're not opening up, and we're going to have it very controlled and regulated, and something kind of like that. So there's very much this idea that Mesmer and America and the Erdtree Kingdom, this was not, like, established part of their land on their borders, right? They had Altus Plateau, but this Shadu Altus was considered something, like, separate, or at the very least ambiguously in, like, a border zone. And now with Mesmer's Purge have they firmly established themselves as, like, this is our land now, and we're gonna, because it's a highland, right, because it's a plateau, we're gonna call it essentially, and it's, you know, in the shadow version of where the Shadow Tree is, you know, on the other side of where the Altus Plateau and the Erdtree were, we're gonna call it Shadu Altus or Shadow Altus, right? I think the Perfumers still drop all of their materials. Yeah, but they could bring those materials with them from regular Altus and then, you know, have them. And that's the problem. We don't find any of these materials out in the wild. So we have to either presume that either A, they've harvested them all already and not a single one of these flowers and species have been preserved anywhere else, or that they took what supplies they needed, and they've been living off those ever since. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, exactly. So I don't think you can make a good case for the Perfumers. I don't think you can make a really strong case for the Perfumers coming in later versus earlier. I think the easiest conclusion with the evidence we have right now is that the Perfumers have to exist at the time that Mesmer's going into this this purging of the hornsent. Those dueling shields, I assume, are based off ones from manuscripts of Hans Tollhofer from the 15th century. I have no idea what they would be inspired from. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Maybe there's some like history to them that might have inspired their purpose for these ritual combat things. But, like, all I can say is that, like, it's very clear that whatever the intention was, that they really want to make it clear that Rellana has her own shield in order to highlight the fact that she had to prove herself to Mesmer. So Mesmer and her didn't have an established relationship. This is kind of like, okay, I don't know who you are. You're claiming that you're coming in and you're joining my cause, presumably with sanction from my mom, but you know what, I really need to prove your loyalty, so let's go through this song and ritual dance or whatever to kind of, like, you know, do the, let's do all the ceremony needed for me to trust you, as a presumption. Found something else when looking through the interviews. The lands between are blessed by the presence of the Elden Ring and by the Erdtree, which symbolizes its presence. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. For some reason, the, music's having problems, so let's switch over. There we go. Oh, you know, this is a little too epic sounding. Let's do something like this. There we go. But yeah, that blessing, which would also be grace in this case, by the Erdtree makes sense. Can I post one of the manuscripts of the shields in the general chat in the Discord? Oh yeah, sure. Pastor, if you want, post in post in the lore thing if you think it's that relevant and stuff. Like I don't care. Yeah, never feel like you can't post something in the Discord. Like as long as it's not against, you know, Discords or the rules in the Discord server. Yeah, it's fine. Like, just make sure it's in the proper channel, and you can post that in, like, general. You can post that in the lore thing if you want to talk about the lore implications. Yeah, I agree. They already existed when the Crusade started. What I think makes sense is that the perfumers of Altus already knew how to make the spark aromatic and started using for different reasons. Yeah, this is what I'm thinking. The spark aromatic was created for the purposes of the burning with Mesmer, right? So, like, Mesmer, he's going to go off and use his flames. Marika, who obviously establishes the perfumers, like that's still consistent. She's going to then be like, okay, I'm going to send a bunch of you over with my son so you can do this. Also keep morale high by continuing to teach the faith of the Erdtree, right? She's doing that. But in the course of doing that, they need to make sure that they have proper weapons and stuff to help out in Mesmer's crusade because they're going to be on the field of battle and stuff, right? Like, this is not going to be, like, past wars, right? Because we have to presume that the last time that any of the priests fought was probably during the Giant War, right? Which was, we see, like, the Two Fingers insignia. Obviously, the Fire Monks become established in the wake of that and stuff. There's a lot of incantations being done there. So, like, they generally don't go to the front of battle and stuff. But now we're talking about Age of Plenty. If we want to say that perfumers exist during Mesmer's age, then we have to imagine that they developed as a result of the Age of Plenty. Which, again, I'm fine with that. I originally was going to have my analysis cover that during Radigan's era. But it works either way, and I have no problem with, like, putting them earlier. So, like, yeah. And then, as in the course of that, they're like, okay, if we're going to go off with Mesmer, we have to discover new, magic to help. Okay, he uses fire. Well, we're going to create our own little, again, the spark aromatic one. And again, when we're talking about spark, we have to keep in mind that the spark is talking about, like, gunpowder, which has, like, the kanji for, like, fire in it and stuff like that, right? Like, so, it's a little, you know, it's not gunpowder in the literal sense the same way it is in English, so. Yeah, shouldn't violate any rules. Just ask in case some people don't like images being posted in the general space. Yeah. There's no rule against it. If people have problems with it, again, we'll deal with it when they come to. But I've never heard anything of that happening. So feel free to post whatever you want there. General is for general. If it doesn't fit into another thing, it should be able to fit there. If we need to make a new like, you know, category or whatever, a new little like channel for people to chat in because like something's really popular, we can always do that when it comes to it. A group for the Crusade, another layer on this. Yeah, exactly. So we have a split. So we have one group which goes off into there with their spark aromatics, and then we have the other group which stays. Now here's the question, right? Because this is a nuance, but it's worth delving into. Did they leave the formulas behind for the spark aromatic and stuff? So when the events of the Shattering happened, they had that formula ready. They're like, hey, we're going to dig this up out of the library. You know, it's in this old musty book we haven't touched for, like, who knows how many years. But you know what? You know, needs must. We're being attacked in Langdell. Let's make sure we use this. Because we have to keep in mind, this use of perfumes for violence happens post Second Defense of Langdell. The first time we see the perfumers likely taking, like, direct combat role is probably during the Second Defense when they're, you know, shooting all those giant perfume vat things in the artillery strikes, right? With all the gases coming out of them and stuff. So that's probably the first time we have the perfumers actually participating in war. And then obviously we see them, you know, around, you know, helping with the actual war efforts itself. And then we have the them going off trying to discover new poisons and other ways they can create violent perfumes and things. Yeah, it makes sense in my mind, right? Yeah. So I feel like that might be more likely than them discovering the perfumes on their own independently without any help from their predecessors. It also will help fix the taboo idea, because if there's something that is a taboo, it makes more sense then if they ended up already having something related to that taboo in their records, and it was just one of those things you shelve and you don't look at because you're like, yeah, it's taboo. You should never do this, right? We don't want to have any fire happen because we want to keep this Erdtree alive. We don't want to burn anything in our capital. So that would make the most sense to me. Back to Rellana, though. This tells me, so this more or less tells me that, because I don't mention here expressly, so Mesmer is born. Again, we don't know when exactly anywhere here is, but Erdtree is created. Again, don't know when exactly this is happening, but Caria is established. I don't mention this timeline formally, but now we can say, I think, pretty firmly, Caria is established sometime either before or during Godfrey's like reign as Elden Lord, right? It's around this period. Because we know that with Rellana, when she goes in and joins Mesmer, she seems to still be working with knights who are very, very new to this whole being knights thing. There's several references to the idea that they're junior knights or, low-rank knights, right? So this is the idea that, they're not the elite knights as we're familiar with them later on, right? When they get the more experience and stuff, and there's that huge, divide between, like, the new and the old, right? We're just focusing on the new ones in this case. So there's probably only a few, like, really experienced old hands, if any. We also have, going along with that, the idea that, they have the prototype of the sword sorceries that they use, right? Like the one with I think they're called the phalanx sorceries or something, right? Because the idea is that they're like these circle formations, right? You get it in, you have a bunch of these swords, they go in a circle, and then they'll go and attack on your behalf autonomously, right? There seems to be the idea that, they developed their prototypes differently. So this is, again, similar to the Force and Mit Force from Dark Souls situation, where it seems like, okay, you have this prototype, let's call it, like, the Wrath of the Gods prototype, right? And then you have these two versions where they get simplified, they get developed in a way for, like, their specific situation, their specific cultures to use them, right? And so one develops the way where it becomes a Mit Force, we're going to project that force outward, and the other's like, no, I'm going to take the just general idea of Wrath of the Gods, but just make it weaker, and it becomes the regular Force one, right? Which doesn't harm any people. Same thing seems to happen here, where you have Rellana and her knights, and they finalize the sword sorceries as we know them, but then you have Rellana and her party, and they seem to go in a slightly different direction using that same basis of magic, right? So you already have the sword sorcery stuff established, but you don't have it in its final form as we know it in the base game. And that's something that happens later. We also know that Rellana and her forces don't update their weapons and armor since the Liurnian Wars, right? Because the Liurnian Wars was the whole purpose of them having their shields defend against both holy and sorcery, right? So they weren't just concerned about the Academy potentially rising up. They were always concerned about the Erdtree potentially becoming a problem in the future, which then happened with the Liurnian Wars. And if there were any updates from them at post-Liurnian Wars, then the holy stuff should have been removed already, with everything else that Rellana does to showcase how, oh no, we're all friends, and we don't have to fear each other, and we're all one, and we're all like kumbaya in this nice little happy friendship circle, right? She would have removed that from the shields then if there was any updates to them. So we can pretty much say that by the time of the Liurnian Wars, Rellana and the Carian Glintstone Knights and all that stuff, all of that was finalized by that period. So again, Liurnian Wars still makes sense that they happen here, right? Still makes most sense to me here. Now again, all this stuff I'm putting right before the Omen Curse in column B, but I can see someone making an argument that if the Crucible was already in decline, you can argue that a lot of this stuff should be in column B instead. But for now, we're going to assume that column B is not needed. Like, we're going to wait till the Omen Curse until that becomes relevant. Which, again, I don't think the Omen Curse can now happen until the Purge. Like, I'm pretty sure we can use the Omens as a very clear 100% indicator that, okay, when the Omen Curse begins is around the time that Mesmer's Purge has gone in full swing and has made significant gains, for lack of a better word. Because otherwise, why is this curse happening? Because the game seems to be trying to imply that it is a direct response by some supernatural force to Marika purging the hornsent. So she's like, okay, well, your people are all going to be born with horns now, as, like, evidence of your sin. I don't know if this matters, but the accord between the trolls had already been established between them and the Carians. Yeah, this is for sure. The only question is if the trolls, as we know them, were, if they came with the Carians or not. So in my current analysis, I make the argument that as part of the relations between Marika's kingdom and Renalla's kingdom, they start exchanging trolls. So you have trolls who were on the mountaintops and came down to the mountaintops, who have their insides changed because they served on the mountaintops, that they therefore, what's the word? That they therefore sort of I don't want to say defected, but they sort of, like, decided that they would leave the Erdtree Kingdom and join up with Caria instead, right? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, chat. Does Rellana's troll that she summons use the golden sword, or at least has it on its back? Maybe he doesn't use it in combat, but does it have the golden sword of the fire giant conflict on its back? Post in the Elden Ring section? Cool. Cool, Pastor, thanks. Again, people are sure to feel free to chat about that if they think there's anything interesting in there that might apply to the lore in game. But does anyone remember if there was the golden troll sword that on the back of that troll that Rellana summons during her fight? So the hats the Omen Killers wear are supposed to look like the hornsent, which are the ones hunting them. I don't think they have the sword. You don't think he has the sword? Okay. The hats the Omen Killers use. The hats are supposed to be the spirits that the Omen see in their dreams. Now, the question would be, are those supposed to be the spirits of the Omen that were killed? I don't know, because we see that the hornsent also have vengeful spirits. And there's a huge focus on spirituality with them. Now, keep in mind, spirituality in this case literally means in Japanese a spirit, nature, or quality. So the idea is that if you are born with bigger horns, you have more spirits in you. Which is why when we have this idea of the big horns of these babies who die, there's these vengeful spirits that get summoned, like they are with the other bairns. Or is it bairns or bairns? I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that. I think it's bairns. But hey, the water dolls. No one's gonna get that reference, but the point being is that, you know, you have these you know, little like monuments to the death of the babies, right? And they all have the vengeful spirits, even the ones in hornsent culture. So I have to assume that the vengeful spirits thing is consistent with, is like a byproduct of the horns. Now, why is that the case? I don't know. Maybe that goes into Rao lore, and maybe there's the idea that this is a curse or something to that effect that goes like way deeper than we might initially have thought. But yeah. Yeah, so I have no idea if those vengeful spirits are the same ones that would be corrupting the hornsent. That's what I thought initially, right? Like, that was my first impression. I was like, okay, yeah, this makes sense then, because then the hornsent are corrupted by vengeful spirits because of everything that America did to the hornsent in the Land of Shadow, and therefore, as a result, you know, they're now, like, you know, haunting the children of the Erdtree as a way to get back at her, right? That would make so much sense. But there's so much culture in the hornsent already about spirituality and spirits and vengeful spirits of those who die, at least, that, like, yeah, I can't say that with any certainty now. B. There we go. They do have the golden sword. I just checked in Rellana's fight. Okay, thank you so much, Pedro. So, yeah, they have the sword. So that goes to my point where I think that you would have to, no matter when you think Rellana made that oath, you'd have to assume that at the very least by the time that the trolls are going over to affirm that oath that they made, because the implication seems to be that Rellana, the oath was originally made when Rellana was very young. So again, I'm making a distinction here. There's talks about Rellana when she is very young, and there's talks when Rellana when she is young. And this is done for a few characters like Radon and stuff. And the difference that I'm trying to make here, the reason why I make that distinction there, is because the terminology is implying that when we're talking about like a kid, like, you know, like really young child, like typically like, you know, like a toddler or maybe a little older than that, right? Like, you know, maybe someone who's like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 maybe. Versus say when you're just young and you're like, okay, maybe you're like a you know, like an older teenager, 20s, maybe 30s or something, right? Like, you know, somewhere in that like ballpark, right? So we're talking about like, obviously, you know, two very different periods, and, you know, probably more 20s than 30s if I had to really like, you know, drill down into the details, right? So we're talking about the idea that, you know, Rellana, when she's making this oath with the giants, seems to have been, still a child, up on the mountaintops at that time. Because, again, this very young is also used for when she finds her moon, which, as we know from the base game, is the moon we find on the mountaintops, according to that one guy who makes the pilgrimage there to die, basically. I was wrong about the gem color of the Blessed Dew Talisman from the game. It's actually amber, not red. Okay, good to know. So they actually just use, like, the regular amber. Okay. There might have been trolls that came down following the neighbors' astrologers and later on some defectors from America's forces. Yeah, that's totally possible too. But the thing is that what Rellana summons when she's trying to so for example, when we get a dragon, we just get a dragon. We don't get a glintstone dragon of one who already eats sorcerers, right? So this would at least imply that at the time, at some point during the oath, these dragons were affirming their oath not as those who were already eating sorcerers. Now maybe some did, but at the very least we have to assume that not all of them did. This is where I go into the idea that the glintstone dragons we see in Caria are likely responsible for destroying and killing the moon folk and moon noble. Oh, actually, the moon nobles might still be alive if they're the nobles we find in the moon folk ruins. But anyway, the point is that the moon folk on Caria are probably killed and eaten by the dragons, and therefore they become the glintstone dragons, right? Because they eat sorcerers and stuff, and that they get the glintstone from the sorcerers. By comparison, you have like the one dragon down in the Liurnia Lake, who also is, supposedly was a regular dragon, but ate a bunch of sorcerers, like we see the one sorcerer body right at his den or something like that, right? Like, terrible choice, honestly. Right, so same idea. So it's like, okay, there's all this evidence here that you have dragons that are eating sorcerers and stuff, and yet, from what we could tell, this wasn't a thing with Rellana, so likely the eating comes later, and likely happens, post, Rellana, the Carians basically going through their downfall and stuff, and then the dragons are like, okay, I guess we're gonna renege on our oath for now, and then, of course, Ranni comes in and tells the one who, challenges her, no, you're not, and this one's like, okay, at your service, my queen, I'm your knight now. But yeah, you'd have to now make the same case with the trolls then. At some point, Rellana has a troll who's affirming her as just a regular troll, and she's using that one to represent them, not one of the Carian trolls that are already there. And in the case of even all the Carian knight trolls, we already see that they've all had their insides removed. So the question is, when did this happen? Like you said, maybe there were some trolls who came down with the Carians as part of Rellana's, because we have to assume Rellana being very young, but in making these oaths and stuff, she was already taking up a prominent position in the Carian family, right? Even as a very young child because of her moon discovery and all that crap. And then they're coming down to Liurnia, right, to settle. They would presumably have brought some of those trolls maybe with them. And then, like you said, maybe later, more of them join after the whole betrayal with the fire giants and things, right? Maybe that's the argument there. But either way, you would have some trolls who have their insides removed, and so they don't have the fire giant's face on them. But then you might have some that do. So then, was part of that agreement like, okay, we're fine with you having these fire giants and taking some more of our fire giants, but you have to make sure all your existing trolls, they're not fire giants, like technically, but well, actually, they're technically fire giants, but they're just lesser fire giants, right? I guess. Okay. Anyway. Not going to get caught up in the semantics. The point is that you have some trolls already, where we're going to let you have some more of our trolls if they want to leave, right? But you have to make sure that the trolls you already have are going to remove all their insides and stuff, right? Because the only thing that makes sense then. Because you can't have like a post-Fire Giant War and then the Carians and stuff move down, because of all the stuff we see with the Astrologer Village getting wiped out and stuff like that. That would cause so many problems for Liurnia's relations with the if, like, Rellana was personally there when her village gets, like, exterminated. If she already left and it's like this, like, oh, yeah, that's my old home, like, maybe a little pissed about that, but, needs must. The guy thinks he's found her moon, but, the game is clearly trying to convey to you, if it's trying to, like, the game clearly conveys that that's supposed to be where she found her moon, and it's consistent with the background we see in her little talisman thing, so I would say that it makes more sense than saying at the Moonlight Altar. But it still feels like she had special contact to be at the Moonlight Altar with its unique moon. Obviously, the Moonlight Altar has a very unique connection with Rellana and the Carians because we see the moons there. But that could easily just be because the Carians went there and then they basically summoned or made that area like consecrated or whatever for contact with the moons, right? For some reason, the Carians left the mountaintops to go down there. Maybe it was for better contact, similar to the fire giants going up to the mountaintops, but then they're going from a tall mountain to somewhere lower down in elevation, right? So clearly they had some motivation that led them to want to do that. Maybe it was at the direction of the moon, and the moon said, hey, go to this new location down here. It's going to be great for your future. I promise you, your fate's going to look up from there. Does anyone remember an interview or press release talking about how several assassins target America's children spread too far across? Yes. Smotown has brought up this interview several times, so if you look at some of his old videos on the Night of the Black Knives and stuff, he's sure to mention it. So I would recommend checking there, Night Scout. I don't know which interview that was exactly, but yes, it has been mentioned in at least one English interview. I don't know if it's been mentioned in Japanese ones. Yeah, I strongly recommend checking Smotown's video on that, of some videos on that, because I think he mentions the specifics of the magazine it comes from and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, so let me put this here. Caria is established. Trolls join Caria. So we have to have Carian troll knights with their insides removed at the time that Rellana's joining Mesmer. Now, it could be that the specific troll knights we see in the Realm of Shadow didn't have their insides removed until after entering the Realm of Shadow. But like I said, this becomes a very weird point, because we know about what happens with the farm colonists and the establishment of Stormvale and all the bridges and stuff that are made as part of these new relations with Caria and the Academy and Liurnia and all that stuff, right? So there's obviously a relationship between Liurnia and the Erdtree Kingdom, and that between these two kingdoms, there's also at least a tepid, I don't want to say alliance per se, but, there's this sort of tepid, friendliness, right? Like amicability, right? Like it's not weak, it's not strong, there's a lot of tension still there, but they're not like outright, enemies, like they're not having any contact or doing anything with each other. And because of that, it's very easy to imagine Rellana being someone who knew of Mesmer enough to become, like, infatuated with him, but him not necessarily knowing of her, especially considering Marika seems to have gone to great lengths to keep him from being in the public eye. So it's very easy to imagine that Rellana going to Leyndell as an ambassador for her kingdom, because who would make a better ambassador for the Liurnia kingdom than the Queen's sister, right? Like, that just makes sense, right? Like, this happens all the time with royalties today, right? Like, you send, like, a sister, a cousin, an uncle, whatever, related to whoever the reigning monarch is, and they're there to act as some sort of diplomat or someone who can, serve some sort of diplomatic function in foreign relations. Happens all the time. So, you get like Princess Rellana, and she, as a knight, and she's also a knight, right? So she can, she's a knight, she has her own knights, she and her army can, like, or at least a small, like, the small core force of knights that serve her, they can all go over as part of this diplomatic delegation, right, to Liurnia and help with negotiations and stuff on their behalf. And then she sees someone like Mesmer, she becomes infatuated, then Mesmer, of course, gets shoved off into the Realm of Shadow, and she's like, hey, Marika, what's this all about? Oh, really? Well, I want to kind of join and help too. It's like, okay, well, if he wants you, then it's fine. It's like, yippee! That's the thing that makes the most sense to me. Now, it's also consistent with, like, Omen Curse and stuff, because, again, we see Morgott with all these weapons that deal with, like, his early, things that he would see when he's growing up in Leyndell for the few years before he gets shoved off into the sewers, right? And one of those is, of course, a Carian Knight sword, which, again, that's consistent with that. It's like, okay, yeah, you have Carian Knights, you have Rellana, like, the Princess of, like, you have all this stuff that was, like, already part of, like, the diplomatic relations happening in Leyndell's royal court at the time. Someone like Mesmer, and if Morgott can have contact with a Carian Knight, even if it's just, them seeing each other, not necessarily directly interacting. The same thing could happen with Mesmer and Rellana. Oh, so you think that Rena was the third sister? We still have to answer who she was. So, okay, so this would presume... This has several problems to it. One, it presumes that Rena is the only tower that we see which hasn't been renamed, because we have Rani's tower, we have Celavis's tower, and Celavis, as far as we know, is just a sorcery professor. He's not related to the Carian royal family in any meaningful sense. You have to imagine that these two towers were renamed for their current occupants, but the third one was not. And I'm not saying that's impossible. I'm just saying that's hard to prove, or at the very least reliably work with as, like, just a basic presumption. I would need a lot more around that to build a theory for. So, by itself, I can't really answer that. Another issue we have... Yeah, another issue we have is that we don't know how many more Carian princesses there were. Because correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't the thing about Carian princesses mention there were once many, and now there's only one, which is Rani? Because if so... You can't really say many, if there was only Ronnie, Rellana, and quote-unquote Rena, right? You have to say there's more. And if so, were all of them sisters of Rennala or other, some close relations who could also be considered princesses? Or were they children of Rennala instead, right? There's still the question of, did Ronnie have sisters? Or was it just Radon and Rykard? Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's exactly the problem. And I struggle to figure that out, considering how huge of a focus there is on showcasing Rennala's failed creations, which, as far as I can tell, they seem to all be the females, right? Like, that's the model used for all the little, like, youngling scholar things in her boss fight, right? Like, I assume those are supposed to be all women, right? Or young girls. And in light of that, we also find their uniform and stuff from the artist in the royal graveyard who's taking a shot of the, he draws the dead, and the last thing they see, where they're being, like, dead or died or buried, right? In this case, it's the academy where Rennala is performing it. And, of course, it's called Resurrection, right? So you get the, resurrection, but the Japanese means, like, rebirth and stuff like that, right? So it goes into the whole thing of, the secret forbidden art that Rennala is doing and all that shit. So, yeah, when I consider all that, I'm like, are we being told that Rennala had children who she lost? So there were other princesses that, in some form or another, ended up dying. Or is that completely, just, it's unrelated, just saying, like, okay, we're just, some of America's, dead, quote-unquote, children from the Amber Egg have been buried in Carian Royal Graveyard, up until the, up until the point of, her being, quote-unquote, imprisoned, because she was already doing this before she was imprisoned. Like, she had to be doing this pretty much ever since Ratigan, shortly after Ratigan took power, right? So that's, the whole entirety of Ratigan's reign, and then, shortly after the Shattering and stuff, sometime during that period, the Academy decides we're going to imprison her, right? Like, nothing changes for her. Like, she's doing her own thing, but, she's technically not allowed to leave, right? And then, obviously, they're doing the whole assault on the Carian Manor and stuff in the course of it. So yeah, that's something to consider. Did Rennala have other daughters besides Ronnie? I think, though, if you want to make the argument that Rena is the crone, I think there's a stronger argument now. If you want to argue that okay, how do I put this? If you want to argue that Rennala had a older sister who was significantly older than her and Rellana, right? This would be, Rellana and Rennala were essentially born really late for whatever reason, and then they have this older sister who, by the point of Ronnie meeting her, was already an old woman, right? And this becomes another question: is if the lands between are blessed by the Elden Ring and the Erdtree, and the Rune of Death and stuff being removed is having an effect on everybody, it should also have an effect on Rennala and, everyone else in the lands between and stuff. That's the only thing that really makes sense, right? I can create some, hand-wavy excuse for why it might not work in the world of man. I can't necessarily do that with people who are, on the lands between, even if they're not aligned with the Erdtree and stuff. Because it should be affecting everybody, just, as a universal, law of nature. So, Rennala has to stop aging at some point, right? And it has to be sometime when she's relatively young, right? Because she still looks like she's, she still looks like she's 20. Same thing with, Rellana and stuff, right? Same thing happening with her. But then, you have this, old woman, quote-unquote, Rena. If that's the old crone. I don't know. That's where problems with timeline and aging become so hard, because with Elden Ring, it's not obvious to me yet where the cutoff period is on when we should stop when characters essentially can live for as long as long as the plot requires them to, versus okay, they have to live for X amount of years before they have to have died. Same thing with because that also has implications for the swordsman who manages to train Melania, but is also implied to be the same person who stopped the rot in the Lake of Rot for some period. So it's okay. So that guy also has to be somehow wrapped up into this and not be dead by the time the events are happening. So a lot of questions, like I said. begs a lot of questions on how characters are living so long, or if there's like other forces involved besides the Erdtree that can cause like some sort of immortality stuff. Because if that happens, then like, you know, all bets are off. Like anyone could potentially be alive right now, because you're like, oh, you know, they have the blessing of like the rock god that is keeping them like alive or something. It's like secretly rotting them on the inside, but you won't know that. Anyway, let's focus on the actual lore and stuff. Okay, what's the next event? Oh yeah, we have to also controls running contract, Erdtree is created and stuff. Nobility is established, perfumers. Okay, we can also say this for 100% certainty. Misbegotten are enslaved. Alright, so we see the Misbegotten acting as essentially the same way that they do in the base game, where they're all rebelling against Mesmer's forces in this case, which tells us that they were serving in Mesmer's army up until that point, either as just, you know, basic servants doing like the, you know, like the menial tasks, or even potentially as fighters. Either way, it's very clear that, okay, Misbegotten had to have been involved in Erdtree society during this period, which again makes sense. They're supposed to be touched by the Crucible, and this is considered them being punished for that. They were, their features and stuff were something that was considered holy and stuff, but would later be disdained as, like, impure and things. As I established in my analyses, it's very clear, or most likely, that the Misbegotten are products of some contact with the Crucible, at the quote-unquote at the Sun Capital by like the Farum colonists or related peoples, and then they get brought in, and some of them, whether or not they are a subservient class, are allowed to live in their own quarter. Again, you can argue that it's a slave quarter, but again, we've been colloquially calling it the pagan quarter until now, because it's very clear that these are people who haven't bowed down and accepted America as their god or anything like that, right? But they have essentially more or less agreed to stop, you know, physically fighting and resisting the Erdtree's rule, at least until recently, right? With what we see with the, you know, Langdell in its current state, right? So they have been, like, living and doing their own thing, and they're connected to the farm, colonist culture, right? At Fortified Manor and stuff. So all of that makes sense. I've also talked about the idea that, again, this makes sense in the light of Stormveil, where the idea would be that we see Weeping Peninsula Misbegotten so far in the south, because these Misbegotten come from Stormveil Castle under Godric, and the reason why Godric had Misbegotten at Stormveil Castle is because these Misbegotten were brought to Stormveil Castle, because much like the Farum colonists themselves, who were kicked out of the Fortified Manor and the Plateau to help build the Stormveil colony as its labor, the Misbegotten, those same colonists who transformed into hybrids would also be suffering the same fate, right? So it makes sense that we have Misbegotten that can be traced to Stormveil, who ultimately traced back to the Fortified Manor and the Sun Capital, and all that was happening there. So that's all consistent, right? In that case, you can either argue that you have Misbegotten from Stormveil Castle, or Misbegotten at Langdell. Again, we see that corridor, so there's definitely a population you could have drawn on from there. In either case, you take some of them and you bring them with you to the Land of Shadow to help you in pursuit of the Purge. Because again, we know there's only so many people who are joining Mesmer's army, because this is supposed to be dishonorable. It's like this very important task, but, entire noble families would chase out their sons who decided that they were going to go and join up with Mesmer. They're like, oh my god, you're going to use that fire wielder? Like, ah! So with all that in mind, I think that just sounds natural to me. It makes sense. It's fair. Now, we also know that the, Misbegotten we see in the Rao Ruins specifically. Right next to them are a bunch of Mesmer's forces who aren't dealing with those Misbegotten, but they're dealing with the naked mole rats. What are they called? The Blood Fiends? Yeah, Blood Fiends. So they're dealing with the Blood Fiends, and those Blood Fiends are based on the ashes of war we get in that area, are actually the Misbegotten. The Japanese use the term oppressed slaves, which is the same terminology used in stuff like the winged Misbegotten ashes, right? Same word for, like, oppressed and slave are used. And that seems to be telling us that, okay, so these are some of the Misbegotten who, in the Rao Ruins, the ravages of the war, right? So they're doing all the purging and stuff there, and, like, some of the bloody corpses and stuff, these Misbegotten slaves, maybe they were tasked with, like, cleaning up the bodies, collecting them, preparing them for burial or something, right? They find the formless mother in the wounds of the dead, and they end up becoming, like, the Blood Fiends that we see in that specific area, right? and which again makes total sense and stuff. Though it's funny to imagine we have like hornsent who turn into blood fiends, and then you have Misbegotten with all their feathers and bumps and like all the stuff that Misbegotten have, right, as hybrids, right? And they turn into the exact same thing. It's like, wow, they lost all their feathers, all their fur, like all. Don't you know Pyro is for scrubs, lol. Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, Mesmer is not a high stats individual, right? So I'm trying to think. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else we can derive from the Misbegotten, right? Like, that's everything we got on their timeline, right? Oh, no, actually, there is something else we can learn from them, right? Because the Misbegotten and the Stormveil connection, we can also say, Farum colonists enslaved, right? Because, again, we see when we go to what's-his-face, not Gale, the stupid boss that shouldn't exist, Boar Guy. I'm just gonna call him Boar Guy. So we see in Boar Guy's, Gaius, was it Gaius? Yeah, Gaius. Gaius's, boss room. He has the, he has all these, armor, like, they're not corpses really, but, they're supposed to be like corpses, right? But you have all these armor in the ground of the Farum colonists, right? The Banished Knight armor. You also see a lot of their weapons in the ground there. We also see some other weapons. We see weapons of duelists. So, those who were fight in the Colosseums, essentially. And we also see, like, the generic, Guts weapon, the Guts Greatsword thing. I can't remember if we see it in wider Caelid, but I know, correct me if I'm wrong, Chad, don't we see the Guts sword in the Caelid, fight with Niall or O'Neill or whoever's in the, at Ground Zero for the Rot? I can't remember. But I want to say we find the Gut Sword somewhere in the area of Caelid, right? Because I know we acquire it there. We also see EG working on that sword, which makes sense, right? We also see it in the Fortified Manor, but you find every, like, weapon in the Fortified Manor, so that's not anything too special. You find it in the carriage. Yeah, you find it in the carriage, Xavier, but I'm thinking about, like, out in the open world, do you see it, like, scattered about? Because you find the Banished Knight weapons, right? So you have all these Farum colonist stuff, which makes sense because you have, Commander again, I can't remember if it's O'Neill or Niall in Caelid, but whichever the dumb fucks it is, you have him and all his guys who died, right? So he can only summon their spirits, right? So that makes sense, right, for the Caelid and stuff. But the implication seems to be you have an army of mainly Banished Knights, but not necessarily strictly just them, who were at Mesmer's castle, and they seem to have been up until recently serving again as part of Mesmer's purge. We also see the Banished Knight weapons in front of Castle Ensis, right? Among some of the weapons that are, like, stuck into the corpse piles of burned bodies and stuff. So it looks like, again, they were definitely helping with the purges at some point. And now they are all dead for presumably trying to rebel, and Gaius then put them down. They're like, no. Presumably Gaius was commanding all of them, which makes sense, because Gaius is, like, an outsider, and who is being mocked by the Erdtree faithful and stuff. But he's really good friends with Mesmer, so Mesmer's like, okay, dude, I'm gonna have you be my commander of, like, my other fellow renegades and stuff, who are, like, outsiders and not, they're not, like, fully embracing the Erdtree and stuff. O'Neill and Caelid, thank you, Night Scout. Smotown sourced the interview to a Bandai Namco Age of Gods article that also summarized the story trailer. Didn't find a mention of the Rune of Death in the non-quoted text, though. Damn. Unfortunate. I see Radon swords and Omen cleavers. No Guts, great swords in O'Neill's area. Okay, good to know. Okay. Yeah. Speaking of the Radon sword, this is not going to be related to this this timeline we're putting together, but the Radon greatswords now can be justified on account of us learning that Radon had personal knights who had similar swords to his with the mains and stuff. So now we can basically just kind of, like, rationalize those weapons as being like, oh, those are, like, some from, like, Radon's personal knights, but all of them except Freya died. So that's nice. That's nice. Now we can use that as a justification. We're like, that wasn't just like trying to generically represent, like, knights and soldiers who were red maids. It's like, we could just say they were the personal knights specifically. Yeah, but we also have the Omen cleavers. You're right. I'm trying to think if there's any scenario where Radon could have Omen in his army for any reason. That'd be hard. Yeah, that'd be really hard to justify. Maybe you could argue he took some from Stormveil, with O'Neill and stuff, but again, because it's specifically in the Kayla Dead Zone, and there's so much focus on that being, like, you know, the battlefield where, you know, like, it's the heart of the battlefield with Radahn Malenia. I don't know if you can justify it going that far back. Actually, no, you could, because, O'Neill joined, before Malenia's battle, right? Because the idea is that he stays. Yeah. So okay, actually, yeah, you can. So you can make some argument for Omen then. That's the best case you can make for Omen then at that period. Just take some Omen from Godric's forces. Like if you left some in Liurnia, you can imagine you left somewhere taken over to Caelid as well. Omen cleavers are probably just supposed to be smaller version of Radahn's greatsword. Okay, I'll have to look at the specifics then to be absolutely sure then. But yeah, it could just be like generic weapons for generic weapons' sake. But I'm trying to rationalize it. Play devil's advocate. DLC Radahn swords are more slender than base Radahns. Yeah, but again, the idea would be that you have some variety, right? Like okay, you have some like Freya who use slender versions, but then you'd have some that would use something more like Radahn's weapon. If I recall correctly, I think there's a knight who has an Ash of War that uses Radahn's sword in its graphic. Don't quote me on that though. It's been a while since I looked at the Radahn stuff, which I'm going to have to update now, because now I have to include the thing. Oh yeah, at some point, Radahn made a promise with little kid Miquella, not realizing the long-term consequences that might have. Teehee. Radahn here just trying to be, like, you know, a good little older brother to, like, the cute kid who thinks, he's like, oh, he thinks he's going to marry me when he grows up. Oh, he'll grow out of it. It's like, no, he did not. He did not grow out of it at all. He did not grow at all. Anyway, so, hello, hey, little church lore, you're just in time. I'm trying to think now, chat. Farm colonists enslaved, is there anything else that we can derive from this? Yeah, nothing else we can really derive except they, it's obviously not the ones that would join Langdell and become part of, like, the regular, you know, part of the regular citizenry there. It's clearly those who were either at Stormveil. Yeah, this actually increases the chance that the Misbegotten that were brought from Stormveil, which is actually really funny, because among all the other reasons for why Stormveil took so long to complete, like, because it starts super early in the timeline, but it only happens until, like, some of the last events in Godfrey's reign. Among all the other problems, you know, like the Stormlord being around, causing even worse storms than we have today, and all this. So, like, all the other issues is like, okay, you have the weather, you have like this you have the distance, you have all the slaves now compared to the slave masters, all that. You have the idea that some of the labor was taken away for this super secret mission. That's funny to me, I'm not gonna lie. Savage Lion Claw Ash of War looks like Freya's or Radahn's sword. Okay, cool. Because I know you also have that one in the DLC, right? But I'm thinking of one in the base game. But anyway, we also know that several Radahn people end up in the Realm of Shadow and stuff, right? So, we definitely know the Realm of Shadow was accessible to people, outside of just, like, the group that we have that's connected to Miquella, and, obviously, what's his face? Gaius and stuff, so. At the very least, it looks like their, Mesmer was allowed to receive more aid and probably supplies for some time. Now that I think about it, that could also explain with the Perfumers and stuff, that the Perfumers still have some of their supplies because they weren't just, you know, they're at least receiving more stuff from the Motherland at some point. Until, like, obviously everything collapsed with the Shattering War and stuff probably, then they probably stopped receiving supplies and things got a little more dire. Now let's look over here, chat. Let's go back. So anything else I could possibly be forgetting about, right? So we have all this stuff. This goes with what we generally talked about with the Perfumers. Like, they could invent a lot of these different types of perfumes and stuff if they're using them for combat, and then, or have, like, some peaceful versions of those that can, you know, reapplied for combat very easily. Trying to see if anything stands out with the Ashes of War or something. We got more Crucible stuff, but I don't think that adds anything. It just gives more variety. It's like, oh look, the Crucible powers also include wings and stuff. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, we already knew that. Like, we see that with the knights. Though, correct me if I'm wrong, chat, are these the exact same wings that we see with the knights, or are they, like, a slightly different type of bird wing? I don't remember noticing a difference during in-game, but maybe there's something more obvious for one of you guys. Yeah, this is just generic stuff. Yeah. The only thing really notable, again, is that we see all of these incantations and stuff connected to Mesmer use the Crucible incantation. I find this incredibly interesting that even this one, the Wrath from Afar, it's using Crucible incantation, even though it happens when the Elden Ring is shattered and the Erdtree is broken, which tells me that the Erdtree cross was 100% not being used for incantations at this point. Like, all the incantations with the Erdtree cross, I think this more or less... Let's add this to the timeline. Erdtree cross used begins seeing use in incantations, right? Because you can make an argument about some incantations and stuff, whether or not some incantations were invented earlier or later in the timeline, even though they used the Erdtree cross, right? But I think at the very least, the DLC is now heavily implying that yes, even though these were incantations which could have at least theoretically have been used or had a purpose even earlier like say the one about the vow to the I vow to the Erdtree, and it's like gives you all the buffs and stuff. That one, for example, is supposed to be for like Knights Out on campaign, and it's like, okay, well, the mountaintops are technically them going out on some foreign campaign. Going to Gilmira could arguably be them going out to foreign campaign. Like, that's where we find the incantation for Morgoth's current campaign against Rykard and stuff, right? So if that if it's far enough to be warranted for Rykard, you can make the argument there, right? But yeah, it would have to be until the same stuff as the Ancient Dragon War, the Lyrian Wars, the Fringe Folk Rebellions, right? Like, these are the events where I think, like, especially the Fringe Folk Rebellions, those would be the type of events where I think, okay, this is what would warrant the justification of creating a specific incantation for the foreign campaigning versus some of those earlier conflicts we were talking about. The modern Erdtree cross might really just be politically chosen if stuff like Wrath from Afar can keep the old sigil. Mesmer soldiers wouldn't be kept up to date on all the political change and heraldry stuff. Yeah, that's what exactly I'm saying, Night Scout. Now, here's the thing. We know the Erdtree cross, or some variations of it, did exist at the time of the Age of Plenty and stuff. We do see that, right? When we're looking at, like, old catacombs and stuff like that would date back to those eras. And, like, other things of that nature. Like, we see, for example... let me include here somewhere early on. Dominula culture, Erdtree cross iconography. Cannot spell. Established, right? So sometime early on, again, probably going even before any of this Godfrey stuff, but just want to establish here to make it simple. We see the iconography related to the Erdtree. Now, originally, I would think that was something that would post-date America establishing a kingdom. It's this way to kind of integrate the old traditional pagan practices from Gilmira's snake worship into the locals' beliefs, into the locals' belief system, so they can kind of somewhat mesh with the Erdtree culture, right? But now, with the revelations in the DLC, I'm not so sure. Now I am more willing to believe that America got the design for the Erdtree cross from her traditional people. And, like, she took elements like this, right? And she's like, or this, right? Or maybe even this. I can't remember if this one in particular is being used. But then she's like, okay, what if I put them all together into a cross formation and had an Elden Ring in the middle to connect it all? I'm actually now more willing to believe that that the cross on iconography goes the other way around. Like, Marika comes from that culture. As someone like Teen Sith, and, well, Nardi brought up to me, but apparently Nardi brought up because Teen Sith brought it up, right? But I'm willing to believe now that that Marika's village was part of that larger Dominula culture that was in the region. Similar to how we see on Shadow Altus and and the immediate surroundings, there's evidence of Godfrey's barbarian culture that we also see traces into the Altus Plateau. So it seems like just generally this highland culture, these highland cultures were just spreading around here. Or perhaps a resentment that the blessing are no longer as plentiful, thus leave. Okay, again, the reason why I have these things is because we clearly have a form of, okay, we have this is representing plentiful crucible. This is used to represent where crucible ain't so plentiful anymore. It's kind of looking like it's dead, and it's dead while overgrowing. So it's like, oh wow, that's not good, right? And then you have this, which is what we see basically become the universal image in the modern time. So yes, it's obviously political in nature, right? No matter how you want to argue this, it's obvious the idea is that, okay, this no longer exists. It's no longer suitable to use this, right? This as a symbol. So we're moving on to this, right? Now you have some of the same aspects, right? Like you said, something like this and this. See some similarities here, right? With the cross imagery, but it's not the final form as we see it here. And I think the reason why it's not the final form as we see it here is because probably this was the idea to kind of sort of meld together the two, right? But then when that's gone, okay, we'll use the full abstract image because we now no longer have a definite, lively, prosperous, vigorous Erdtree that we used to have. Right? Now, if this is true, right, I'm gonna just say Dominula Erdtree cross on Ecroton reestablished to keep it simple, so we don't have freaking entire paragraphs for these things. So all of this has to predate, has to be there. Also, again, since I said we were gonna include some of this stuff, let's also point this out. Bear hunting barbarian established, right? So sometime back here, we also have the bear hunting barbarians becoming a thing. Now, granted, this doesn't come out as far left field as it might seem on first impression. I'm looking back at the base game, I'm noticing my Godric thesis has been stupidly popular lately compared to my other articles, and I can only imagine it's because of my analysis. Again, I don't know this for sure, but I can only imagine it's because of my analysis of the bears in the Mistwood, and how it looks like you have a bunch of Godfrey fanatics in the Mistwood ruins at the time, and then signs of luring in bears and trying to trying to bring beasts in closer and stuff, and how that inadvertently brought a rune bear which destroyed the whole ruins. It seems, destroyed the whole village. It seems like that becomes a very prescient analysis in light of the new lore we got in the DLC. So I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And we also see, even though rune bears and bears aren't prevalent on the plateau, I guess they were hunted to extinction, right? It's funny that we find them specifically at the Orisa ruin, the Orisa catacombs. I mean, the Orisa hero's grave and the side tombs. So it's oh. So I'm willing to believe that Miyazaki had the bear lore. The bear lore was already a thing, and Miyazaki just had it in mind, so he's leaving these little cute little cheeky hints. It's supposed that the rune bears was there first and the barbarians were the reaction to it. As in the rune bears were at the Mistwood originally, yes, I would assume the rune bears were native, yes. That would be my assumption, that the rune bears and the bears were native to the Mistwood. And then, like I said before, I believe that again, it's in my analysis, that the reasons to believe that the Mistwood is old Aohid, cannot pronounce that, but Aohid, and then later during Kenneth's time, then he's gathering a bunch of rebels, rebel Godric people, rebel Tarnished, who are aligned with Godfrey and stuff, and think Godric is this terrible scourge that must be eliminated, and he's gathering all these people for his ascension as a rebel and stuff against the false lord of Stormvale or whatever, right? And then as a direct result of that, we have the whole things at the Mistwood that seems to take out his army, and then of course Godric sends in the blood mad, knight in his battalion, and you know how that worked out. ALA Yura saying don't go near the dragon lake, and someone said, awesome, there's a dragon in that lake. Yep, same exact idea. It's like, yeah. There's probably a bit of that, right? There's a bunch of bears there. And it's like, hey, don't do anything about the bears. But then you have all these Godric fanatics who are like, oh, that's great. Let's go out and go hunt the bears. And then you have like some, what was it? I can't remember if it's a merchant or if it's just an enthusiast or something. I don't remember the exact lore. But again, we have the nomadic merchant who sells us right across from the ruins that recipe book on how to create like beast lure pots and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, you know exactly what was going on there. And like, it's like, okay, well, somebody lured a bear too close to home. Okay, so yeah, so all of that like fits and stuff, and it makes sense. Okay, so Godfrey specifically came out of a culture that because originally the idea would be, okay, they're a bunch of barbarians, barbarians do barbarian things, they probably like fight amongst each other and stuff. It's like little tribal warfare and stuff. But now we have the general idea that they weren't necessarily fighting each other, which helps keep the numbers high, so like Godfrey can like build an army and stuff. But like maybe they're competing with each other, but they're not necessarily killing each other. And or at least en masse, like in intertribal army conflict type style, right? Their main focus is on hunting animals, and specifically powerful beasts, which would earn them the most status. And this explains so much why we have one, Godfrey would be so into helping Marika take over and specifically defeat the Beast King Sarash, right? Like, imagine you get to defeat the so-called Beast King. I mean, that like for a barbarian whose whole entire culture revolves around hunting big powerful beasts, like you can't, and him being all about kingship is earned like through power, and like you have to use power in order to dominate and become the strongest. Like defeating the Beast King is to become the king of the world, is like that's a narrative that Godfrey can get behind, or Horaloo could get behind, right? And then on top of that, one, he has such strong respect for powerful beasts like Sarash, and later the Storm Lord, the Stormhawk King, right? So the fact that we have that new lore is like it fits so well into the context of who Godfrey is, and like why he has this such big respect for beasts and animals and things, on top of just this general idea that he respects strength. I'm trying to think though, is there anything that plays into Marika and his relationship? We know they're in the same region because now we have Marika's village here, right? So the idea is that Marika has her village and stuff. I still am not entirely sure if Marika and her village are participating in the exact same rituals as Dominula, but it's something we have to consider with the festive Greece we find. Godfrey would love Bloodborne. Oh yeah, he definitely would. Someone should do a what if, instead of doing all these stupid like power scaling vids or whatever, people should do a video about what if you put a character in one Souls game and another Souls game, what would happen? Put Godfrey in the world of Bloodborne. He'd go straight to Loran. He would. He would go and kill all the dark beasts. Do you think the Stormhawk King spirit likes Nephelion anyway and subtly helps her? Yes. I go over that in my analysis, Night Scout. At least. Yeah, Fringe Folk Rebellion, and I think some of Godric touches on that. But yeah, I 100% believe that the idea that she can call the storm from after receiving the Ashen stuff is a direct implication that she has developed some bond with the Stormhawk King's spirit in the Ashes, and that even though it's a very proud and fierce and independent beast, it recognizes and respects this descendant of Godfrey who is shown a great deal of kind and respect for her kind. Oh, sorry, her kind, I meant his kind, my bad. Anything else? No, okay, I gotcha. So let's see, Perfumers are created, ritual combats and stuff. Ritual combats die everywhere but Realm of Shadow. I wonder if the beasts regularly respected the bear warriors back. That's a good question, because we don't know how intelligent some of these beasts are. They have to be they have to be like, they have to at least be as intelligent, though, as I think animals like Sorosh and his lions are, because we now know that the room bears have names, right? The red bears we encounter in the Realm of Shadow. We know at least 2 of them have names. So I can't if they have names, I have to imagine most of the other bears have names too. And if other bears and room bears have names for each other, that would at least imply they have a degree of intelligence similar to other sentient life forms. Like, if there was any case for the Stormhawk King to survive the initial fight and the conflict was earlier in Limgrave's history... So are you trying to argue that the duel between Godfrey and the Stormlord happened at an earlier point in the timeline than you think I would say have it? Like, I would have it, of course, here. Just trying to get clarification on what you're trying to argue here. Because I think there's a huge problem with trying to say that Godfrey comes to Limgrave to fight earlier in the timeline. Because there's so many events that really... Like, there's no real impetus for Godfrey to be warring so far from the plateau until this period, when, like, all of it just naturally flows together. Yeah, maybe earlier, and that's why the Stormhawk King likes Nephilia, because then she has traits to discover and like about Godfrey. The thing is, that could happen just from their one encounter, right? Again, Godfrey develops this incredible respect for the Stormhawk King enough to let his people survive and respect his will of their, you know, their duel, right? Their duel to essentially decide a battle and the fate of both of their peoples, right? Who wins this battle, who controls this land, all that stuff. And Godfrey fully respects that and allows his the Stormhawks to essentially get pretty much off scot-free. They're allowed to pretty much, you know, be with the Banished Knights, do as they were up until that point. They just are no longer, you know, the independent rulers, owners of the land, right? They're subservient to Godfrey and his kingdom and his government, right? So, yeah, I don't think you need to make the Stormhawk King have any earlier involvement or have any earlier conflict and time to spend with quote-unquote Godfrey for that bond to be established when Nephilia happens later. Yeah, I don't think it's needed. Yeah, I don't think... No, I don't think... You can't have Godfrey going down there to establish the prison colony independently. Because, again, what do we have here? You have all these Banished Knights from the fortified manor that are coming down to build the Stormvale colony. And the idea that Godfrey has to first go down there and conquer the land doesn't make sense, because the entire point is that they served the Banished Knights, served the Stormhawk King, and were part of an independent Stormvale, again, a complete castle Stormvale, which raised the banner of the Hawk. None of that makes sense if the Stormhawk King is dying before they even built the castle, or they're, like, coming down there to build the castle. Like, so yeah, I just don't think it works, timeline-wise. What I think happens with the Stormhawk King is that we have a Godfrey who comes from a culture of beasts and stuff that respects it. You have the Stormhawks who settle for whatever reason on the hill and were doing their own thing, right? They probably came from Farum Azula, and there was probably this interaction they had with Farum Azula, which is why we see some of the hawks and stuff seemingly already part and parcel of Farum Azula culture when the Farum colonies are established, right? But then they get kicked off, right? Then they have some of these colonists who were part of that culture, kicked off of Altus Plateau and brought over to Limgrave to build a colony for this plateau kingdom up in the Highlands, right? And the Hawks don't really care because this is not really related to them, and it doesn't really make a difference if there's a castle or not. They'll just, you know, instead of them dropping down on the ground to rest their wings, they're going to do it on, like, the spires of this castle being built, right? Like, it doesn't really make a difference to them, right? But you have this rebellion that crops up, and this rebellion reaches out to these Hawks, and they're like, hey, we've been, you know, friends with your Hawks of your kind, with your brethren from Farum Azula, and you have this history and culture there, so why don't you help us out? And Stormhawk King basically agrees. They're like, okay, I'll do so, if you're agreeing to basically make me your king, and you'll, you know, bow down and listen to me, right? And I become, like, this ruler of not just the Hawks, but even these people who will also enact my will, and, you know, this whole larger thing with the Farum Azula culture and the Farum colonists, as we talked about before, right? That makes more sense into what justifies Godfrey coming down and having to conquer than anything else that we've seen with the evidence so far. Oh, did I ever tell you that the Land of Shadow incantation has the same casting animation as Elden Stars? Which Land of Shadow and incantation? You'll have to explain. You'll have to show me. Not this one. This one? Or this one? This one kind of resembles the one where you get on the ground and kneel, right? The one you get from Sunflower, so the Shadow Tree avatar. That's the only one I can think of. This one, maybe this one? The center one? So this one. Gotcha. Yes, okay. So this one involves you going down on the ground and commits essentially Elden Stars. That's cool. To reaffirm, is Limgrave always a prison colony to the Golden Order? If so, it would need some Golden Order loyalists to oversee the prison population? Yes, that's essentially what seems to happen. That seems to be the justification for the Omen that we find serving Godric, or tracing back to Godric and Stormvale. So, like, we see some Omen and stuff that are on their own, like other Godric forces on the plateau. We find some more Omen, of course, in the Catacomb with a bunch of Godrics, living or dead. I think they're almost all dead, right? Yeah, so we have the Omen and then the other, like, dead, soldiers of Godric in the Catacomb as part of that failed, botched Liurni invasion, right? And then you have the one Omen. Again, we have maybe Omen that we're fighting with O'Neill and the Banished Knights with Radahn, right? And then you have the one Omen, which we still find in Stormvale Castle, right? So the idea seems to be that just like how America's children were being born, how America's populace were giving birth to children in the Erdtree capital on the plateau, it was also happening at the prison colony, which makes sense, right? Because you have overseers who do so, and they are doing stuff with their families, or maybe they're getting jiggy with each other or whatever, right? And they're producing children, and those children were also Omen. But unlike in the Heartland, on the Motherland, where there's the strong central government control to enforce this will of, no, we're going to kill all the babies, we're not going to allow any of these things to live, the prisoners there could have more respect for their children, and either they would have those children continue to live, or they would at least use them as, slave labor like the others, right? So they would at least give them the mercy of, we're not killing you, but we're not, we're not gonna, let you, be recognized as, proper because you're, this horn monstrosity or whatever, right? So this idea of, oh, we're on the frontier, we have a little more autonomy because, we don't have America breathing down our necks. And obviously, when the Farum colonists rebel and become independent, then these Omen definitely survive to become slaves, and they basically get kept as slaves when Godfrey and America take over again, and then Godric and Godefroy and Godric eventually take over these castles, right? So these seem to be the ideas that these Omen were all holdovers of that period, and that seems to be the justification there. I imagine the Fringes as a space for the others, slaves, indentured soldiers, heretics. Is there a historical parallels present that the Fringes were a place for the uncivilized? Yes, this is kind of the underlying point I'm making, right? Like, when you're on the Fringes, you have a lot more freedom than when you're in somewhere central to when you're closer to the center of power, it is easier for that center of power to exert control over you. When you're on the Fringes, you're able to get by because you're out of sight, out of mind, right? So it's harder, and because there's that distance, it's harder for them to be able to go over and even reach you, let alone know about you. So again, this idea that, okay, Omen were constantly being killed, Omen babies were constantly being killed, except for the royals, right? Which was causing the whole political problem in the first place, right? And why eventually America and crew were like, we don't want to, but we're gonna throw you in the sewers, right? Versus out in the Stormvale colony, essentially have these Omen being born, and whether or not they were enslaved at this point, at the very least they were being allowed to live. There's a notable difference between a prison colony and having to pick up the pieces alone as an exile, though. Which pieces are we talking about here? Because, because I need more context on that before I can comment. Yeah, the idea is definitely, though, like Little Church Lord points out, when you are on the fringes, you are able to get around with being, quote unquote, less civilized, whatever that's being defined as. Pick up the pieces and being kicked out of civilization, but having the freedom to build your own. Okay, yes. Obviously, yes, there's a huge difference between, again, being allowed to, act on your own here, right? But the point, I think, being made in this context is that Stormvale is clearly a place where, obviously, it's a place that's made for outcasts by virtue of being this prison colony that is exiling so many peoples that used to be native to Altus and then displacing them to this other place to build this castle, this fortress, right? In this very hazardous, hostile, well, not really not hostile in terms of wildlife, but, like, hostile land in terms of, like, the storms and stuff that are happening there and everything, being so far and, distant and everything else, right? So there's a lot of freedom that comes with that allows stuff like, say, Omen to survive, despite everything, right? But yeah, I agree. It's not exactly the same as what I think Little Church Lore is pointing out, but I get the underlying concept. I agree with. It's a similar like idea of how this would be feasible, right? It's realistic. Like, this makes sense to me. Like, this is how it played out, right? Like I said, I struggle with stuff like, say, oh, Godfrey and his forces beating the giants, like with how big the giants are and how many are supposed to like stay stuck on that stuck on that mountain and stuff. Is that realistic to me? No, but that's the lore. There's creative liberties you could do, right? Like, I can hand wave it, right? Same thing with like the super giant skeletons we have that they show in both Kalis. Like, how realistic is it to support a population that's supposed to be that big? Like, it's not realistic whatsoever, right? Like, let's be real. But again, artistic license, all yada yada yada. Let it, trying to have something for scale, for wow factor and stuff like that's fine with me. I don't mind. I love the soundtrack for Midra. Oh my god, yeah. Midra is... I don't know if I like Midra's boss music or the Erdtree Avatar's boss music more. Midra's didn't mean a lot to me during the fight, but like when I think back on it, I'm like, it was nice. It wasn't like egregiously offensive to me. Were the Commoner Omen actually executed, or did they just usually die from the horn cutting? Are you talking about for the DLC specifically? Or are we talking about the... Oh, no, you're talking about Commoner Omen, so it has to be the ones in the base game, right? We don't know. Because it's not clarified in the text. I'm pretty sure I remember us going over this on the Discord, and I remember it being ambiguous there, but I can't remember the exact reasons for why. Like, I can't remember the exact wording. Hey, Raijin. How you doing? If I remember correctly, though, the commoner, it was just mentioned that their horns were cut off. It's never mentioned that they died as a result of their horns being cut off. It's left ambiguous there. But it is saying that they basically all died in the state. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Mama was being used there. It should be stating that they died in that state of being hornless, but not necessarily implying that them being hornless is what caused their death, right? In the same way that I might say, okay, I have a sword, which has its blade snapped off, and then it rusted in that state. Obviously, me snapping off the sword didn't cause it to rust, but it has rusted in the state with which it had its blade snapped off. Like, that has not changed, right? The blade was that blade was never repaired, so that way the hilt and the snapped off blade were restored to their original form in there. It remained as it was in that broken state. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at. So it's ambiguous on whether or not cutting off the horns is what caused the babies to die versus other things. Now, as we see with the golems that drew the carriages over to the fringes of Altus Plateau, and then they all seemingly just broke down and got dumped there. And then we see this culture of, like, omen, some of them, like, wearing clothes and stuff. In there, it looks like there were some babies who were thrown onto the pile, being like, well, they're all dying. We got this mass, genocide of, infants that we're going to have to go dump off in the corner, right? It seems like some of them weren't 100% dead, even though they were probably expected to be dead, and they ended up somehow surviving and growing up to become this, like, wild, savage tribe cult thing among all the broken down carriages and stuff, right? That seems to be the implications that we see in that area there. Which also may be part of the reason why we have the Perfumer ruins with what's-her-face, doing her whole stick of trying to, like, save all the impure ones, including Omen. I'm enjoying your audio Abyssal Archive while I played Elden Ring. You researching on the Omen? No, we're talking this stream has been focused around the general timeline and stuff of the DLC. 1 second, chat. I need to do something. I'm seeing my dog in the corner. I am back. The thin thing to think about with the golems in Rao is that the golem arrows have storm powers. I'm trying to think. Do we see storm powers on any of the other golem arrows or something whatever similar to it? Because I'm trying to think of a justification there. We need more background music. Let's do Hoyoverse while I'm getting this all set up. Honkai Star Rail OST Hoyo Mix. Let's do Spacewalk. That's a chill one. There we go. All the golem arrows have the same effect as Stormhawk bone arrows. Oh, okay, so it's consistent at least. Okay. I'm trying to think then. Is there something we can derive from that that might be relevant with the light of the DLC? Because so we know the golems. Okay, so something we also have to say during this era. I don't know if it's before or after the Erdtree created or Mesmer's born, so we'll just put it here. Marika repurposes AC golems. And then there's a question mark on when exactly this happened. But sometime either during her reign after establishing the Erdtree Kingdom or shortly before it, we need to have her people collecting these golems and repurposing them, because we see them clearly being used on behalf of the Erdtree Kingdom. We see that practice continued at least up until the Omen incident. So again, stops using AC golems, question mark, and this might be where we start seeing again, this goes into the whole idea of transitioning to using trolls and stuff, and the cruelty shown to trolls and things. But I think he said the Japanese describes the storms differently in each description. I don't remember what the JP was for those arrows at all, so I'd have to go back and check. But thank you for reminding me, Xavier, because I will check, because if that is in an item description, then yeah, that might be good to know. Oh, gotcha. I always find it fascinating how the timeline in Elden Ring works and with the DLC where the events play out. Yeah, that's part of the reason what we're doing here. We're trying to take the existing time. So again, just to go over with everybody, because I didn't do this in the stream yet. So this is my current timeline of how I had events up until the events of the DLC. Horalu becomes Godfrey, right? The Altus unification. So he wars and fights and he takes over the entire plateau as we know it. The banishment to the penal colony. So the native Farum colonists, at the fortified manor especially, but you could argue it happened all over, were rounded up, and they were all essentially sent in a conga line of humiliation through Liurnia to establish a penal colony at Stormvale, on Stormhill, right? And that became Stormvale Castle, right? Now, it's not completed yet, but I'm just saying that's when it began. They're banished to the penal colony. Now, keep in mind, in Japanese, the penal colony means just a land of exile, so, obviously, a Japanese writer can get a little bit creative with that, even though, obviously, as far as we're aware, there wasn't anything except Stormvale Castle being built, right? So there wasn't, like, it wasn't like a prison in the sense that we would imagine, like stone walls, cell blocks and stuff. We don't see any of that at Stormvale, but the idea is, like, it's just a land of exile, right? It's just a place where, all these quote-unquote prisoners, slaves, lower castes, prisoners of war, however you want to term them, get sent off to this land, this hill, and they're now building up a castle there, and that is called the penal colony. That is that land is considered the area where all the exiles are going to. So just want to clarify there. The giant war. So again, we have, okay, they take over the colony, they start banishing the people there, then they're like, okay, well, we have this wonderful Erdtree and stuff, but these giants might burn our Erdtree, so we have to go up and deal with these giants before they potentially burn our Erdtree, right? So the giant war happens. Then the age of the Erdtree begins. Now, this is the age of plenty, the age of abundance, the you know, the all of that, like, this is what we consider like the beginning of, like, you know, the Crucible era as we know it, right? Then that happens, all good things and shit are going on here, and then you have the Godskin hunts and the Serpent Rebellion. So the Glowmite Queen rises up, she's killing all these quote-unquote gods, presumably demigods, and making them, you know, turning their skin for her you know, her golem artificial creation stuff, right? And then you also have this Serpent Rebellion, so you have this idea that during the Altus unification, the Great Serpent and the Serpent worshippers of Gilmira all basically were like, okay, cool, yeah, we'll join up and, like, you know, we'll bow our heads to the Erdtree. But then, you know, the Serpent and their worshippers rebelled in league with the Glowmite Queen, and then Marika deals with the Glowmite Queen while Godfrey deals with the Serpent, and all, you know, all that gets sorted out. And then Marika becomes the Eternal Queen, because once the Glowmite Queen and stuff happens and she's slain, Marika decides, you know what, I'm not going to die, I'm not going to let anything that I've created here die, so I'm going to remove the Rune of Death and become the Eternal Queen, right? And then we get to the new second era here, which was like, okay, after all that, well, the Crucible starts dying, and one of the first symptoms of this is the Omen Curse. Then the Crucible fully dies, and the Age of Plenty ends as we know it. Now, again, I'm saying dies, you know, but, you know, it's not the Erdtree dies or anything like that. It's just, you know, the great abundance that was present in the Erdtree during the Crucible era is gone, and now it's just the plain old Erdtree as we know it, you know, minus, you know, the whole losing some of its brightness thanks to the Elden Ring shattering and all that. But anyway. So then you have the first Erdtree seed sown when the Crucible is gone, so it shoots out these Erdtrees. It's like, oh no, I'm dying, right? So then these Erdtree seeds get sown, and they become the minor Erdtrees and stuff. And Marika begins researching Order, which includes researching these minor Erdtrees, which start showing up around this period. And then finally we have the last period, which you have this abstract Erdtree cross imagery now. This is when it hits its final form. We have the Liurnian Wars. So Marika, in the course of trying to research that what becomes Golden Order fundamentalism, she's like, hey, you know who has a lot of research on this subject? You know, the Liurnians. You know what? It would be nice to have, you know, Liurnian territory. So I'm going to go over and take this over, and I get to kill two birds with one stone. Well, that goes miserably, but eventually she just has Radagon marry Rennala, and she gets what she wants anyway, right? Then the Ancient Dragon War happens. Don't know why, but Ancient Dragon Grandsax decides he's going to crash the party in Leyndell, and suddenly they're all at war, right? But that, you know, that doesn't end too hot for the Ancient Dragons, right? Though, again, we might have a lot of excuses for why the Ancient Dragon War happens when it does because of the new lore we have on dragons. So that's cool. Fringe Folk Rebellion. So then, but in the course of the Ancient Dragon War happening, you now have all these colonists who worship the Ancient Dragons and stuff, and come from that Ancient Dragon Farum Azula culture, who rebel, and they take over Stormvale, and they establish a hegemony over the entire frontier region, over the south, all the way to Caelid and Celia and all that stuff, right? So they take over that entire southern area, and things are good, until Godfrey shows up and takes over Stormvale after dueling with the Stormhawk King, Stormlord, who, as part of independent Stormvale, and brings Stormvale in line. Then they start taking over the land up until the Siege of Morn Castle at the southernmost point at Weeping Peninsula, right? At Castle Morn. So that happens, but then Godfrey comes back and he's like, okay, good, gonna now fight east until I go to my last battle in Caelid. Then after my last battle in Caelid, Marika takes away my grace from my eyes, and I and a bunch of my buddies in the army become tarnished. And then Marika's like, okay, you're exiled, and I go, okay, honey, whatever you say. And then I go on the Long March, and that's basically the end of Godfrey's story here. And then Radagon marries Marika because, well, reasons. Yeah, it makes sense to me. Another term for penal colony is exile colony, a place to separate those unwanted society-based. Yeah, I haven't heard that term personally, but yeah, again, when we're talking about the Japanese terminology, that's what it more literally means. And then again, this is, as you guys have probably noticed when you've read all my articles, there's a lot of times where there's a term that has a certain meaning, but the way it's read has a more literal meaning that writers like Miyazaki love to use, right? Or they love to play the wordplay game where, like, you know, they take, like, something where it's like, okay, it has this colloquial meaning, like, you hear that word, you understand it, but when you really think about what that word means, right, when you get down into, like, the linguistics of it, you're like, oh, there's, like, these other word things, right? And that's what happens with, like, penal colony and stuff, right? So, like, you don't have to think of it as, like, a traditional penal colony as what you might have in your mind. It could be something more broad as how Miyazaki seems to be applying it here. Didn't you once note that the kanji used for the perfumers being blessed apothecaries indicate they try to curse people like omens and misbegotten? Yes. The term for apothecary here is a medicine or drug expert, right? It's the same kanji for like teacher, master, whatever you want to put, right? But again, it's the same term also used for sorcerers or pyromancers, or so you'll often sometimes see it translated as user instead. But the idea is like you have someone who like specializes. It's essentially a term when we talk about expert, we're talking about someone who specializes in a field, right? So a scientist is someone who specializes in the field of quote unquote science, right? They're not necessarily they know everything about science and they're like the best one, right? Like there's obviously scientists who aren't that skilled, right? There are apprentice sorcerers, right? So they're sorcerers, but that doesn't automatically mean they're like a master sorcerer or anything like that, right? It just tells you that they are quote unquote experts. They are specialists. They're specializing in that field. It's the same thing that we're talking about here. Is that you're talking about apothecaries? You're talking about these people who specialize in drugs, right? Like medicinal, especially medicinal drugs. So this idea with perfuming and stuff is all going with the idea that they are essentially they're using healing stuff. And from what I've looked into research and stuff, especially in places like India, you'll definitely see incenses and perfumes and stuff be used as part of like medicine, and it ties into a lot of things with with Buddhism and stuff like that. And like again, I was writing all that for my Radigan thesis, but now I might end up putting Perfumers into its own article, which I was kind of thinking of doing with at least the depraved perfumers anyway, but now I can just do it with the whole thing, right? So I might just cut out all the perfumer lore period and maybe just briefly mention it for like the early establishment of the clergy under America and stuff, but like keep it mostly to its own article. Yeah, for sure, lots of nomenclature, etymology, linguistics. Yeah, like there's a lot of stuff, and I'm no expert on that stuff, by the way, guys, so this is why I encourage you guys, if there's like another content creator who's talking about stuff on that etymology and stuff, like feel free to listen to them. Don't feel like you have to shut them out or whatever, because you're like, oh no, I can just ask Loki or whatever, because I can't promise that I know everything about every little thing, right? Like I'm not like some like trained like scholar with a master's degree in Japanese or whatever, and I know like every sort of historical reference or background or etymological history behind every single little word. So yeah. I think to indicate particular types of patients, though, not just being mystical doctors. Again, I'd have to look. I don't have the language in front of me, and I can't remember the exact terms. Again, this has been a few months since I last looked at it, so. God damn, I wish my memory wasn't so shit. Yeah, I'd have to look at it because I can't remember. I'm gonna have to compile that and double check to make sure. But anyway, so that covers all the stuff we have here with my my timeline here. 1, 2, 3, right? And now we're trying to focus on, okay, what belongs here in column A during this Crucible era, like the rise of Godfrey. Then you have this kind of like, okay, we're having this little the Golden Age is over type of thing, right? Not much going on here. And then we have the Golden Age is dead, and soon is so is Godfrey now. That makes two of us, yeah. It's so strange because I will remember some of the most like random crap. But then, like, everything else, like, I feel like I'm more demented than Joe Biden. Ugh. Erdtree is created, enslaved. Anything else we have here since we're talking about perfumers and stuff? Not really. Oh. This is something we can bring up. Minor Erdtrees in Realm of Shadow emerge. Because we see the beginnings of a minor Erdtree in a very confined area on Shadu Altus, right? There's like I can't remember if it's a secret garden by the perfumers, but at the very least there's something approaching that being done there. And then you have one inside the castle itself. Now, one of them is obviously under control of the castle, so it's easy for that to be a controlled growth, similar to what we see at the minor Erdtree churches, so it doesn't become a full minor Erdtree. But my question is, how much of that is because of what we see here with the first Erdtree seeds being sown? Is it mentioned anywhere in the lore that we have Erdtree seeds being sown in the Realm of Shadow? Gaius definitely goes in column C, past where Dawn is born. Well, yeah, it would be after column C, right? Because, if I recall correctly, the thing with Gaius is him being trained under the Lord, and, like, Radon should still be way too young at this point. Right? Unless we're trying to say that after the Liurnian Wars, there was, like, this huge gap between that and the Ancient Dragon War, and then the Fringe, that or these like conflicts here took place over a longer period of time. Because you can't have Radon being older than like maybe a teenager, a very young teenager, by the time this stuff happens. Because you have to keep in mind, he grows super attached to Godfrey when he's quote-unquote very young. And like I said earlier in the stream, I make a distinction between when I'm saying very young versus young to really kind of hammer home the idea that we're talking about like toddler, young boy, maybe like 10, 12 years old if you're really pushing it, Radon, versus just plain old young Radon who could be like, you know, probably older teen, 20 years old. Like, I guess maybe if you really want to shove it, you could argue that very young Radon could be like maybe like 16 or something, like, right? You know, something similar to like maybe a Princess Dusk situation, right? Where, you know, she's just, you know, I promise you, officer, she's ambiguously of age. But like for sure, like again, we're talking about characters who are like, this is supposed to be, he's young enough to where Godfrey has like such a huge impression on his life. And they're the glowy ones like in the minor Erdtree church, right? Yeah, so this is supposed to be like, they're not like the small golden trees we see, right? So they're not like so young that like, you know, they're like completely newborn. They're in that in-between state where they're still glowing gold, but you're starting to see them start take a form resembling a regular tree, right? Like they're starting to have that texture and stuff where the glow is beginning to fade, but it's not entirely gone yet. So it definitely looks like they're in this in-between state. Now, what makes me wonder is that we don't see any signs of either small golden trees or full minor Erdtrees anywhere in the realm of shadow. So the only thing I can think of is that these are somehow being artificially created. Like, they're either artificially creating seeds to plant, or they're taking, like, pieces of the shadow tree, and then they're, like, raising these, like, pseudo-minor Erdtrees there. That's the only thing I can think of. Gaius was trained in Celia by the Alabaster Lord. Yes, and he was trained there first, before Radon, but then Radon also trained alongside him, so they studied together at some point. So there's some overlap there. So we can 100% say that Radon, at least, must have... it was probably something like Gaius found the Alabaster Lord and was studying under him first, and then introduced him to Radon, and then Radon also got in there. The only question then is this Gaia character, who she is, and where she fits into all this. The cave tree's in a small enough spot that it could be a controlled growth through. Yeah, I would agree with that. It's either it was in such a remote location it didn't grow properly, right? Because it's in such a like confined space and stuff. And then like some perfumer happened upon it, and they're like, "Hey guys, look, we'll create a little shrine thing there," right? But I don't think that's likely. I think it makes more sense that the perfumers established as their own secret little grove where they could study and experiment with creating a minor Erdtree in peace. Celia is an old city. Well, yeah, Celia is really old, right? Celia goes in very long time. But the events we're talking about with Gaius and Radon and stuff have to be, like... They would have to be post-Radigan. Yeah, that's the point. Is that obviously Gaius is being trained first, but there's some overlap because there is mention of how they stay together. In fact, I don't like how the English localization worded it, because I think it's them putting something into the text which isn't actually there. They talked about this idea of them having like this friendly rivalry. It just says that they really studied together and studied, like, they were diligent. They were essentially very diligently working together. So that doesn't necessarily indicate a rivalry of any kind. There's no, like, tension there. It's more like they're literally just sibling disciples. So maybe the localization was trying to, like, kind of give the idea, oh, you know, they're brothers. Like, they're not always, like, you know, on the same page. You know, sometimes brothers tussle or something, right? Like, but, you know, it's not like a nasty, you know, ugly tussle. You know, it's like a friendly kind of, like, you know, brotherly type of thing, right? So maybe that's what they were intending, but it doesn't really come off that way to me. I don't know about you guys. I personally, though, I was like, oh, yikes, when I was reading that, the Japanese script for that versus the localized one. I'm seeing many think that Gaia is the boar, which would be hilarious. You can't see me right now, chat, but I just want you to know I'm staring off at the corner of my room, up in the sky, asking the Lord how I happen to live in this timeline. Or a man's boar that he rides into battle is his fellow student. his fellow, like, classmate in magic teaching. Could Gaia be a mistranslation of Olga's name? No. 100% no. And Olga doesn't study under the Alabaster Lord. He studies under Radon. I know Spotown puts forth this idea that Olga learned with Radon and stuff based on some of the verbiage. But it's something I point out in my Radon thesis that's unlikely based on the language. The language implies that it's more likely that Radon is like training and, you know, training alongside with them in like a kind of like you know, I'm teaching you and I'm maybe dueling you to practice against you and stuff like that for live combat and that type of thing. It's likely has nothing to do with what we have with Radon and stuff. And again, from what we learned with the Freya lore and stuff, it's now 100% certain that Radon only becomes a general very early in Radigan's reign, because the arenas are still open for Radon to attend and to meet Freya and then basically, you know, free her from the dueling stuff so she can serve as his personal knight. The Borzalin, or that got right. Yeah, again, it's very obvious why they wrote the lore for Gaius the way it is, because you can have a Albinoric, probably one of the older first-generation Albinorics, who's like old man, right? So he's someone who's been around for a while. He's someone who could be with Radon while having the age, wisdom, and thus freedom to kind of do whatever he wants, right? He rides on a boar or something, which, again, we see boars everywhere, so the idea that one has a boar that he, like, kept as a pet or something and would, you know, like, ride atop of for so long, that makes sense. And then he, you know, finds and learns under an Alabaster Lord and stuff. Again, nothing too crazy learning about that. And then introduces it to Radon to that, and then they study together or whatever, so they become, like, you know, brothers in their gravity studies. Now, the question I have is, how then does Gaius end up in the Realm of Shadow serving under Mesmer? Because we find a bunch of Radon people also there. So now I have to ask myself, did something happen that forced Radon's men, including Gaius, into the Realm of Shadow? Like, did they do like, was there like a punishment or something for something that Radon did, or is that something like completely like separate? Is this like, oh, they were just doing this on their own? They were trying to look into the Realm of Shadow because they were interested in Godfrey or something. And then like Gaius got wrapped up with Mesmer. Was like, hey, it's cool with this guy. I'll hang out with him now. I have questions. Yeah, Gaius and Mesmer are friends. It's specifically pointed out that they're friends because, one, both of them have a older brother in Radon. So, like, you can imagine, like, Gaius is like, hey, I know your older brother. And Mesmer's like, I have an older brother? It's like, yeah, you know, this is a guy Radon. He's really big into your dad, Godfrey, and all this stuff. Like, yeah, they can, you know, they have something they can talk about there. And plus, they're both outcasts. Like, one's an Albinoric and one is, you know, a Sneck. He could have been assigned to the Land of Shadow as an Albinoric. It might double as a way to get rid of him. That's true. That's true. It could be that Gaius was maybe just not approved of. So when Radon becomes a general and starts building the Red Mains and stuff, Marika and Radigan are just like, but we kind of got to get rid of the Albinoric, you know? We can't have you, like, having that guy hanging around you. We don't really like that happening. We don't want to bring him into the court, you know? He gets his silver yuck all over everything, like... Mesmer is Radon's older brother. You mean? Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, yeah. Radon's the younger brother. Sorry, I forget. Gaius and Mesmer are older brothers to Radon. Mesmer by, you know, actual blood relation via Marika. Or, well, you know, ostensibly, you know, he's the older stepbrother. But as we know, Radigan is Marika. So essentially, they're both children of Marika, right? And then, in terms of Gaius, it's because he's they were sibling disciples under the Alabaster Lord, so he's the Onichan in that case too. Now, trying to go back to what I was saying, I'm trying to think because there was something that I thought of in that moment. Was it the Albinoric thing? No. No, there's something in there. We're gonna put this in column C just so we can remember this though. Gaius goes to Land of Shadow. Right? So if Ritual Combat dies everywhere but Realm of Shadow is gonna count, we're gonna basically all classify this under Radigan Marries America, and we're gonna put like a lot of Radigan Reign stuff under this column then. Gaius goes to Land of Shadow, right? It has to be at this point because any earlier and like the Gaius and Radon timeline doesn't make sense. It's also impossible for us to put Radon's birth anywhere earlier. Like if we start putting the Liurnian Wars and stuff, we can't really put it in this period because, like we said already, all the stuff with Rellana then doesn't make sense. We can't really put it in this period because, again, this period has a lot of shit that's going on that's kind of all directly interrelated to each other. So it's like, you know, it doesn't make sense to have the Liurnian War here. It makes sense only when after this stuff is happening, then the Liurnian War kicks off, and then you have all this other stuff happening. So there's a period for Radon to be born and to grow up a little, see Godfrey in battle specifically during this stuff here, right? These events here during this period, and then he gets inspired and he wants to be just like, you know, Uncle Godfrey, and then we get to this period where he grows up after, you know, becoming like the young lion guy, because now we know that Radon's armor that we see him as a general is different from how he was when he was just, you know, young Radon, right? You know, pre-general, young Radon, doesn't have his army yet and stuff. He's going over to study. He gets assigned, you know, he takes over Caelid and stuff. He's doing his own personal studies and things like that, like at Celia and things with the gravity once he meets the Alabaster Lord. Then he does the Star Sealing. He becomes a general. He builds the Redmanes. He sees the arena before it closes down, Freya, and he recruits her. Then the arena, of course, closes down, as we know, right? Also, it makes a lot of sense now with the idea that Radon frequented the arena, because of course he would, as the Godfrey simp that he is. That then means that when we see all the Redmane stuff, like the Radon Festival type crap in the arena in Caelid now, you can imagine that Radon during the Shattering might have reopened the arena, because like, well, you know, the government's collapsed, like, who's going to stop me? So I can actually now see that the Caelid arena was seeing some use again up until the battle between him and Melania. I wonder if outside forces sometimes got to check in on Mesmer's army to make sure our Land of Shadow Imperium wasn't born and the Sealing Tree was still intact. That would make sense, but again, it's not immediately obvious because we don't have any characters who would act, like, you know, any enemies or characters in game who would act as that go-between. So it would be something we'd have to just infer would have to exist by virtue of the way the system is set up. Which, again, I could totally see that happening, but I don't know for sure. All we know is that for sure by the time that America breaks the Elden Ring and all that jazz is happening, that the Mesmer and forces are basically cut off. And Mesmer seems to only know about what Tarnished and stuff are, and America's whole plan for the Tarnished because of Mikola. Mikola, like, informs him of stuff, which is probably partially the reason why Mesmer allows Mikola to, like, do his own shit. Omen Killers might be go-betweens. They date to after Mesmer's Crusade. Okay, now, I want to agree with you, Night Scout, except there's a problem there. The thing with the Omen Killers and stuff is that they start with Rollo, and we don't know what happened to Rollo. So you could convince me very easily that this is where Rollo begins, right? And that the Omen Killers actually first started here. Now, maybe you're right, and they came in later, and they were brought in later. That's also possible, I think. But I could definitely see a case for their inception began at this point. But again, that assumes that when they're talking about Omen and killing Omen, they're not talking about hornsent in general. They're specifically talking about those born in America's kingdom. At which point, yes, I agree with you 100% then. Then in that case, yeah, they have to. They absolutely must come in later. I don't know which one I would want to believe more, because either way, because you have to do some sort of hand waving for why they're there in the Realm of Shadow either way. I think you're probably right in that the smaller hand wave would be just saying, okay, they were brought in later on after Rollo established them following the Omen incident. But I could see someone trying to justify and say, okay, yeah, it says Omen, but it's really just about the Horn people in general. Yeah, Rollo seems like he was meant to purge his fellow citizens and lands between, otherwise he'd just kill any and all horns. I agree. But you can make the case though that Rollo, because Rollo's focus is on the fact that he has to kill his heart because he's killing innocents, which is basically what's happening with the purge of the hornsent too. So you could definitely make the argument that okay, they're killing all these horned people. And that's a very ugly task, so I'm going to take a potion that kills my heart so I don't feel bad about all this terrible murder I got to do because it's for the greater good of my religion, right? Like, my religion tells me these are all impure, awful people who are unworthy of the Erdtree's grace, and therefore I must kill them, right? But, you know, I have a conscience that feels bad about this, so I'm going to take a potion to remove that conscience. I could totally see that working with the hornsent. But I agree with you. I think the fact that the text mentions omen, is probably the best argument to say, like, by default, we should assume that Rollo and stuff happens later. Which is, again, another reason why I would assume that, all the stuff with the perfumers and things would have happened during Radigan's era instead, long after the fact. But if we're going to say that the perfumers already existed, then Rollo and stuff could definitely have existed during the Omen, like, literally, like, during or right after the Omen incident. Don't we drop Rollo's ashes from the Omen twins? Before Morgoth and Mohg's Divine Tower. Maybe he died trying to kill them. Yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah, that's true. I forgot that we get Rollo's ashes. I thought it was an incantation we got it from him. But if we have Rollo's ashes, then yeah, that would imply he's dead there. It's possible that he was dying trying to kill them, or maybe dying trying to discover the truth about Morgoth the Grace King, because if Morgoth turned out to be an omen, then obviously Rollo and fellow omen horns would want to kill they're obviously not going to accept an omen as their king if they're trying to kill them all. I also wonder if there were rare gaps in the seal, so to speak. Those two abductor virgins seems too Rykard related to be non-winged Mesmer serpents. I don't think they're Mesmer serpents. I think they're serpents of Gilmira that have always existed on Gilmira, and were actually, you know, that reminds me exactly what I want to put here. So we can say with 100% certainty. So here, great serpent killed, slash Gilmira pacified. We could definitely say that the before Mesmer's purge happens, the serpent has to have oh, actually, you know, we'll do this. Great serpent betrays Erdtree. Gilmira pacified. Yeah, we'll have these as two separate events, right? So I think we can say with absolute certainty that the Great Serpent has to have betrayed the Erdtree by this point. Because Mesmer's purge has him bring along his captain of the knights and his son. Was it Andre? I forget if Andreas is the son or if the other one's the son. But either way, it would mean that there is a bunch of knights who join Mesmer despite the flame association, right? So again, this is 100% post-Giant War, but they're like, okay, we're okay with the fire thing. But then the captain of the knights learns that somewhere down the line that, you know, like, Mesmer has a snake connection, right? He's either that he is a snake or that he has, like, you know, this snake stuff in his soul or whatever, right? Like, he learns about his snakiness, right? And after learning about the snake, he decides to rebel and, you know, gather this rebellion against it, which tells us that, one, Mesmer was keeping his snake thing basically on the down low. It wasn't something that was being widely known about. His winged serpent became a symbol that was known about since the beginning of the Purge, but it seems to be the underlying implications of that wasn't being shared, and the fact that he has a captain of the knights who's totally willing to serve him at the outset under, you know, in the name of America. Like, you know, this is all America's holy war, and they're all worshiping America and stuff during this entire thing. So clearly they think this is all sanctioned. This is fine. It may be dishonorable. Maybe not everyone wants their sons or whatever to take part in this, but, you know, this is a very important duty or whatever that he felt strongly about. But even though he felt so strongly about this, the moment he learns that Mesmer is a snake, he's like, no. And this makes no sense if at the time they were openly allied with the snakes and stuff like that. So it only makes sense that the betrayal by the Great Serpent and Gilmira already happened, and therefore Gilmira and its snakes were in, you know, had bad blood with Mesmer's forces. Andres is the father, the other spirit Ash is the son. Okay, thank you for telling me. Wait, Mesmer is a dad? No, right, Mesmer's not a dad. What I mean is they're clearly not winged serpents, so they'd never be allowed in even Mesmer's forces. I disagree with that. I disagree with that entirely, because Banished Knights and Misbegotten are allowed in Mesmer's forces, and they're also considered enemies of the Erdtree. So again, if you are a subservient slave who is through compulsion agreed to serve the interests of the Erdtree, then you are okay to serve in that capacity. So again, why wouldn't snakes who are from Gilmira, who again, this is post-betrayal, right? This is all that stuff. But they have been forced to submit to help with the capture and torture of certain individuals in the realm of shadow as part of this operation. Because the term for reprimand is basically referring to a kind of punishment, right? So the idea, and we see that there, right? Like, it seems to be an area where they torture, they kill, and then they dump the bodies of these victims. I assume I think they're all horned corpses, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. But it's very clear that, like, you know, there's some sort of interrogation or inquisition type shit happening there, and they're being tortured, and it's very obvious where the abductor virgins with their whole Iron Maiden aesthetic are supposed to go in. They're either meant to serve as, like, to capture and bring over these audiences, or they're meant to serve as, like, you know, part of the torture devices type deal. Where's the Banished Knights in Mesmer's forces? As we were talking about earlier, Pastor, you can see their weapons in front of Ensis Castle. They're stuck into the burned bodies and stuff, so they're part of that whole setup of, like, wait, it's Celt Castle Ensis, right? I'm trying to remember what the localization puts it as, because the Japanese is more like, you know, a citadel, a fortress, you know, like something really, you know, substantial, right? It's not like it's not like a castle in the same sense of Castle Morn even, or something like that. Anyway. On the topic, why is Mesmer not a dad? Well, because he didn't accept Rellana's advances there. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yeah, Banished Knights. And we also see the Banished Knights in Gaius' boss arena. Their armor is, like, littered along with their weapons all over that boss arena. So, again. Yeah, not just the halberds. Check the ground, Pastor, and you'll see all the Banished Knight armor. It's the same thing during the second defensive lane Dell, that armor you see on the ground. They use the same models. It's made abundantly clear that you have a bunch of Banished Knights from Stormvale, which were brought over to serve in Mesmer's army. So again, this goes back to the funny thing that, like, among all the other problems that the Stormvale Penal Colony had going for it, losing some of its workforce for some random crusade was one of those things. Mesmer fumble, not gonna lie. Yeah, like I said, there's some things in this game which it's really hard for me to believe on its face, except for the lore telling me it happened, and, like, the fact that Mesmer does this purge thing. And I'm like, dude, this should have taken you, like, a few months, maybe. Like, the fact that you're, like, still, like, you have these buildings which are still alive. There's still, like, these shadow survivors that are, like, making graves for the fallen or stuff. There's still these living, like, horned warriors and things. Like, on its face, I cannot believe this. Like, you literally see in the trailer these giant, you know, like, freaking wicker men crashing through the buildings, burning on fire with all these corpses and stuff. And yet somehow Bellarat hasn't been burned to ashes to the absolute ground is beyond me. Like, it's like Mesmer, like, got through half it, and then he's like, you know what, I'm bored of all this purging. I'm gonna go somewhere else. And just left a bunch of the people there. I think Mesmer Scarseal is basically trapping him into never finishing the rest of the war. If his orders have him trapped in a forever war, it's easier to keep everyone stuck there. Yeah, but that seems kind of stupid then. What's the point of the purge then? Because, like, if the idea is, like, just to make him suffer, I guess you can kind of justify it then. If the idea is, like, okay, you're not supposed to actually exterminate them all, you're supposed to make them suffer. So we're gonna make it so you can prolong it indefinitely. But, like, what's the magic that's making a criteria where it's like, oh, well, you're getting too close to exterminating all people here, well, you're gonna now move on? Like, when does it, like, decide, like, oh, there's just too many, you know, too many, they're not dead? How do you control that with your army? Like, you're telling your army, okay, kill them, but, like, only kill, like, you know, 95% of them. You gotta leave the 5% there, or else, like, Mesmer's gonna have some growing pains in his eyes. Like, again, I just think it's on its face silly. Purge still keeps 90% of hornsent culture dead, so does keeping them in the realm of shadow. Like, it completely separates the hornsent culture from the entire rest of the lands between. It makes them basically have zero influence on the events and happenings of the lands between from that point onward. So, again, at that point, you have to question, what is the point of the purge then? That's my point. Again, the only idea to have the purge is that you either A, want to be doubly sure that they're never going to have an effect on that, or at which point, why are you allowing any of them to live? You're just leaving that door open. Or B, you're trying to prolong or make their suffering, at which point it's like, okay, so you're going to kill 90% of them, but then you're going to leave 5% of them alive or whatever, and then like maybe slowly like kill maybe 1 or 2 of them off. Again, it doesn't make sense. It's silly. Would the abductor virgins be brought in the lands of shadow after Rykard took over Gilmira? No, this is, again, going back to, let's get back on topic. So, Great Serpent betrays Erdtree. Gilmira pacified. Abductor virgins created. So the idea would be that Gilmira is pacified, but as we know, even after Gilmira is pacified, it never is truly pacified. There is this there's this never-ending inquisition on Gilmira that eventually Rykard gets brought into, where they're constantly trying to root out and put down and fully extinguish this snake worshipping culture there. And they don't do it to the Dominilla villages or any of those there, right? Which now makes a lot of sense because now we know how deeply connected America is. But as far as Gilmira and Volcano Manor itself is, and the town that is there, they have long been trying to root out this this belief system in the Great Serpent. And whether because Gilmira's so far away or whatever, they've never been 100% successful. In the course of that, we know that there is Giza, which in light of Jagged Peak, which again, I've told you guys before, I think I said this during the I don't remember if it was during the Let's Play or something else, but the Jagged Peak in the Japanese is called essentially Mount Giza, or the Giza Mountain. Now keep in mind, that doesn't mean Jagged Peak is wrong. Giza is in fact the onomatopoeia for jagged, whatever. So you can read it as simply saying, the Jagged Mountain. It's just that it's written the same way as like with katakana and stuff, the same way that you would read either the city of Giza, right? So when I was reading the text, my head first went to the Egyptian Giza because I love ancient Egypt. But so that was my first thought when I was reading through it, and it's also, it's written the same way with the katakana as you would for, Gilmira Mountain or whatever, right? With Mount Gilmira. So, with that, or Gilmira, I guess, technically is how it's spelled in the JP, right? So, but it's the same idea there. So I can 100% see either, you can go either way. You could say, okay, it could be read as the Jagged Mountain, or you can read it as Giza Mountain. And I don't know which is the fully intentional stuff, because I don't know if there's some like deeper meaning to Giza that there might be wordplay involved. I'm willing to default to what the localization went with and just say it's supposed to be Jagged Peak, though. But in retrospect, now I think that it makes more sense to me now, why? Because I thought Giza was, again, just some foreign name. If I looked into it, I would find it. But now I'm like, okay, it's Giza, but you extend the syllable, so it's Giza. And that's how we got the enemy NPC Giza. Because, again, even it means jagged, but you have to understand, it's, again, when you hear Giza, it's like Giza. It's the same way that in English we might go zzz for like a saw blade or something, because it's the sound of like something jagged. It's serrate, serrated's the better word here, right? Like the idea of like a serrated blade or something, or a serrated saw blade. Same idea, which makes sense when you consider what the Giza invader enemy used as his weapon, and what's allegedly was named after him, right? The standard dueling shield has a Gilmira-related sigil on it too. Does it? I'm actually gonna have to look at that then, because I don't. Let me see. What's this Gilmira-related symbol? It's in the weapons, right? So where's these shields? Okay, there we go. So this, right? So this is the shield we're looking at. Where do we see this symbol? It's a pin photo on the Discord. In the Elden Ring channel, right? I'm looking through that now. Where is this thing? Where is this thing? Must have passed it. I don't see. Oh no, I don't see it here. Oh, I see what you mean. No, wait. Are you sure, Night Scout? I see your pin stuff with the shield, but I don't see the other image here. It's giving me a poop. Let me go to the actual message, maybe. If I jump there, I'll see it. Oh, because it's in spoiler, isn't it? That's why. I think that's what's happening. 1 second. Let's change from spacewalk now. There we go. Unfortunately, it's not loading for me, Night Scout, so... Might just be unlucky right now for me, but I'll check it out later. The symbol appears on the Taker's cameo. Oh, then we can just look at that. If so, then that goes into what we've talked about previously about the betrayal of the snake tying into the dueling stuff and the whole idea of them wearing the armor and the whole dedicated fights to the Erdtree and stuff. That all has to be tied together. Okay, yeah, now I see it. I see it. Yeah, it's pretty damn similar, isn't it? Do we see this symbol anywhere else besides there, or is this the only place? Now I have to wonder about that. I don't think I have a shot of anything that could be connected to Rykard, right? Yeah, not here. Yeah, these guys have horns. It might have a variant on the back of the Gilmira Night Cope. Harder to tell, though. Okay, so... Alright, I'll have to... Next time, when I get the controller stuff fixed, it should be fixed by Tuesday. Again, that should be when the delivery happens. Oh, whoops. 1 second. Whoopsie. Whoopsie! Wait, what's science fiction? Oh, I know this one, but I prefer freestyle. Yeah, there we go. All right. Okay, so it might exist as a variant on the Gilmira Night Cape. Okay. There's no mention of the snakes and stuff on the shield, though. So yeah, it would have to just connect to the existing lore as we have it. Okay, so... Essentially, we have to have abductor versions created. So Gilmira pacified. Ritual combat created. I'm gonna just keep it as ritual combat created because now we can say, okay, all the ritual combat stuff we know of connects back to the snake stuff. So whether or not it actually began with that, or if it began, you know, before the snake betrayed or whatever, all this has to happen here, right? And then we have... Yeah, okay, so we have the ritual combat's created. Then we have Mesmer and everyone going in, establishing a foot to and Shadow Altus and doing their purge, right? You guys said you couldn't find any, I'm gonna do this for now because we're not entirely sure if this is accurate. I'll get a camera and look at these guys myself just to be doubly sure, but for now... Oh my god, I forgot to do it again. Oh my god, I forgot to do it again, Jet. Loop. There we go. I am such a moron. Why do you guys listen to me? I will never know. Ah, damn. I don't think I can cross it out here. Damn. It's okay. We'll just do this. We'll put this as a triple question mark on if this is a real. There we go. Anyway, so, this is likely when I think abductor virgins were created, because I think what happens is, Gilmira pacified, Gilmira Inquisition begins, essentially, right? So, basically, they pacify the region, and they start already trying to root out the worshippers, right? So they're like, okay, we've gotten rid of these people, but we can't have them betraying us in the future, so we're going to start persecuting all those who believe in this stuff, which is going to force it into hiding and force it to, you know, go into the nooks and crannies or whatever, right? And it's becoming this problem that, that the Golden Order is never going to be fully able to do so because, you know, Gilmira's so far away. You can only have so many resources dedicated to that. There's all this other stuff in the kingdom or whatever. And they're not really that big of a problem right now, so it just becomes this kind of thing that harasses the kingdom for up until Rykard's time, right? So Gilmira Inquisition begins. This is when probably Giza gets involved. And that's when the Inductor Virgins are created and their special devices are added. And this is around the same time that we're having America, you know, loading up the whole Mesmer thing. Now, I don't know if the winged serpent somehow ties into this. Like, one of the serpents that is there somehow becomes a winged variant and helps suppress Mesmer's thing, or if that winged serpent is an extension of Mesmer's steckiness. It's just like the good serpent to act as the like counterbalance to the bad serpent, right? To like, you know, sort of like a yin and yang type deal, maybe. I don't know. But that seems to be how this all makes sense. This how it all, you know, joins together. Right? Is there anything else I'm forgetting, chat, before we wrap things up here? Because it's getting late. Tell me if I'm forgetting anything. Like, is there any super major stuff involved that would relate to this timeline? Like I said, hornsent get more or less purged. We don't really see anything major happen with them besides them contacting outer gods and, you know, getting all vengeful and stuff, right? I'm trying to think. Sounds like no one's got any ideas. Maybe some of the dragon stuff, but that's the only thing I can think of myself. Speaking of Gilmira, what's with the Flame of Frenzy stuff going on there? Flame of Frenzy stuff? The only thing I can think of is we have the one troll. Oh, I know what you're thinking of. Oh, because there's the Gilmira Knights who are afflicted with Frenzy. Okay, I am 90% certain that the Flame of Frenzy we see are because they came in contact with the Gilmira troll, who we see has the Frenzy at the front entrance, right? So they were trying to be sneaky and go around the side to, like, ambush, because, you know, they were going through the front way and then the bridge got broken and stuff. And so they ended up starting to build their camps to go around the side, and they were about, you know, they were going around that way, and then, like, you know, Gilmira Frenzy troll guy comes in and, like, you know, blast them with Frenzy. They all get frenzied. They seem to repel the troll guy or whatever, right? So, you know, neither side is, like, completely wiped out. But, you know, these guys now have Frenzy, and the troll guy is still there guarding the front door. So, yeah, I think that's all that is there. It was their way to justify having Frenzy Langdell soldiers there as an enemy, while also having one of the Frenzy troll guys there as well. With the Rellana Dancer sharing most face data with Tanis, do you think it's possible Rykard visited the Land of Shadows personally? I don't know if he visited the Land of Shadows personally. Again, there's still a question of what Tanis foreign country is. I know some people have tried to argue they think it's a foreign land outside the Lands Between. I have always been skeptical of that. I have put forward the idea, the crack theory, that the Queen Tanis face thing is modeled on was Rellana, and that it was a dancer of Liurnia, and Rykard had a mama complex and stuff like that. And who knows, maybe the mama complex stuff is true. But now we can make an argument that the queen could be this Rana, or Rana could be the name of the land. Maybe it's the name of the land and the queen. Who knows, right? But I get the feeling, based on what we see with the Rana thing, it's hard to say, because we see characters like the Red Bear, who is a red mane, so he's someone from the Lands Between, or at least outside the Land of Shadow, who, whatever reason, ends up in that one, you know, mausoleum thing. And then after, like, killing a red bear there and becomes the Red Bear, right? Then you have the one in the east, which is I always forget how to pronounce it. I say, like, Raksha or Rakasha or something. It's Rakshasa, right? I don't know how you pronounce that Indian word, so forgive me. So you have the Rakshasa there, and that's, you know, that screams to me someone from outside the Lands Between, specifically the Far East, right? Now, I haven't checked the lore very closely on that character, so I could be wrong, but that's what my impression was, at least. So if we're finding in the East a character who might come from the Far East, places like, you know, Land of Reeds type region, right? Like there's not Japan's in the Land of Reeds, so maybe this character comes from a not India or something. I don't think Rykard's own birthplace, because they're a foreign country in that regard. I've talked about this before. I'm not going to relitigate it, Night Scout, so please. I'm tired now. Snake Boys and their mama complexes. Yeah. We'll see how that theory pans out here, especially with the DLC's new data. But at least when it concerns Tanith, I think you can make an argument to go either way. That either she's from some people that are either nomadic or have their own country that was in the south somewhere, maybe on the frontier, or that she's from outside that her and her country come from outside the lands between. But like I said, I have to look closer at the Rakshasa, see if it really is something that would probably be like outside lands in between. And I have no idea about the guy from the west, right? Like he just is like generic knight guy from what I remember. I don't remember there being any important lore there. There's Rana, since the Rana dancer has the same face. That is what we're talking about. No, Bray. Get with the program. So yeah. I definitely think that there's definitely 100% connection between the Rana dancers and Tanith. I think just like the fire connection and the fact that Tanith only fell in love with Rykard after he got consumed by the snake, which the snake is very obviously, like, you know, it is the source of Gelmir's lava. It is producing the fire that melts the rock to produces the lava, right? So it's very obvious that Tanith now fell in love with Rykard as the snake because he essentially became the embodiment of the fires of Gilmira, right? So that explains a lot about Tanith's character and what she likes about Rykard. Knowing all that now. It had nothing to do with, like, the rebellion or him embodying all that. It was purely that, you know what, she always wanted her husband to become a fire god. She just wanted to marry a fire god. She's like, I don't like this regular dude, but you know what? I can't do any better in my life. And then he becomes Fire Snake, and she's like, ooh, I hit the jackpot. And then she wants to become Fire Snake when he's dead. So is there nothing else that we got going on there? She wanted a hot husband for real. She wanted a really hot husband. Actually just like smoking hot. Like floor is lava and he's touching all the lava. He's touching the whole floor. He's just like laying spread out, arms and legs stretched out, spread on the floor. It's all lava. With hot liquid magma. Yeah, so I'm trying to think. Yeah, I don't think there's anything with the Rana stuff that we can add to this timeline here. Because we don't know when the Rana people and Rykard came in contact. It could have been theoretically anywhere, anything, especially if they're nomadic. The biggest question then would be, is there a place that we could connect the Rana to in the base game that's not outside the lands between? And like on the actual continent somewhere? Like especially, and again, we want to ideally have it somewhere closer south, or at least some reason why they're in the south where all the blue coast is. Millennia's mentor could have been from Rana. I don't know about that because the nomad, the connection with the Millennia's mentor and the blue nomad is very like there's a very like I think it might, I'm not sure if it said explicitly, but I think it's all but said explicitly, but that they're either the same person or connected. And there's an association with the blue nomad in water, not fire. So I'm not sold on that. Question, does the JP text for Romina's butterflies incantation indicate the butterfly specifically came from Melania or were just unclaimed by her? It just mentions the rock goddess, and we have to keep in mind the strong implication is that the scorpion and the rock god is a goddess specifically, and that Melania would be essentially the reincarnation of the rock goddess. That's like the idea of her several blooms, like she's to when she becomes fully taken over by the the outer god of Rot, who is the rock goddess, essentially. That was my understanding reading the text and stuff, and that has nothing to do with Melania. It's purely talk about the rock god or the divinity, at least talk about they come from the divinity of the rock god, which is that bud that the Church of the Bud was keeping. Would be interesting if Rana was the name of the queen rather than a place. Yeah, that's what I was saying. I'm totally on board with Rana just being the name of the queen, and that there could still be a lot of questions dealing with the actual place and stuff. It also has more than a few questions about where this queen would be or come from. The Rana swords and flowing swords have the same unique strong attack, same one with Millicent does. Yeah, but the thing is that you can make an argument that they're like reflections of each other. Like one is all about water and the flowingness of water, and the Rana dancers are doing the same thing. There's a flowingness to them because of fire and the way that fire, like, you know, flows and bends and, you know, licks and stuff. And then Tanith later associates that with a snake because, again, similar to how Mesmer's fire has that, like, you know, it has a similar thing where the licks and stuff are very snaky and like you take that with like the fire serpent of Gilmira and stuff. You're like, oh no, it's just like, you know, it's like again this idea of like the true embodiment of fire. Same one that Millicent does, yeah. Again, and Millicent, again, there's obvious reasons why there's a connection with flow there with Millicent and stuff as well, right? And the rot. But yeah, again, could there be some connection to the culture? Maybe they split off. Maybe they became their own thing. Sure, maybe. I'm not convinced on its face. I would have to see a more substantial argument there. See this going from Rykard wanting to bang Rennala to Rykard wanting to bang Blackies. Oh my god. We go from Rykard being a full-on mama's boy to Rykard being an NTR hentai protagonist. Oh, that would be insane. That'd be so crazy. Okay, so there's a lot of good stuff you guys have brought up here. Nah, bro, Rykard wanted to bang the Elden Beast. Oh my god. Listen, if you want to bang the Elden Beast, you deserve to get eaten by a snake. Like, clearly Vor was for you. Rykard decided to bang a snake instead. He was banging from inside the snake. Anyway, so looking at what you guys brought up and stuff, there's a lot of good stuff we see here. As we can see, most of the stuff seems to be that from the lore and stuff seems to be relevant to the very early period. I'm not seeing a lot of stuff here. The biggest question is this with the Godskin hunts and the Serpent Rebellion. I now have serious questions about when the Godskin hunts happen, because everything that I look at the lore tells me that it has to happen during this event. But like I said, I remember there being a website or something that said that the Golden Order starts with the Erdtree. And if that's the case, it's really hard to argue then that the Glowmide Queen incident can't happen, has to happen somewhere in the past here, like before Horlu becomes Godfrey and stuff, right? It has to happen before the creation of the Erdtree at least, right? So like, yeah, something like this. Obviously he can't because Placky's wife was dead by the time, so he took a dancer and made them wear masks. Duh. Well, the thing is, I have questions about Placky's god and the Rao ruins now, because now I wonder if that figure we see is in fact Placky's god. And because clearly the hornsent got the Elden Ring from somewhere, because they have the power of the gold of the Elden Ring, and they have they have their roots apparently come from the ruins, and that's where the same source as the Crucible, which again, the source of the Crucible and the hornsent and like the gold, all of that, it all goes back to the Elden Ring, right? And the Elden Ring surprisingly doesn't, I think, get mentioned at all in the DLC compared to the base game, where it's mentioned at least semi-frequently. So it's very obvious that they're relying on you understanding the base game lore well enough that you're following what they're dishing out. And I think it's very clear now that somehow the hornsent came into possession of the Elden Ring, either during their archaeological excavations of the Rao ruins, or maybe they already had it at that point or whatever, right? And that somehow got thrown in with the rest of their tower culture and their spiral tree stuff and all that crap. Oh, the fact that we have Rao as a civilization now that maybe was near Altus in the past and maybe had its own god based on that statue. Maybe the Glowmite Queen killed that society. The problem then is that she wouldn't be she wouldn't be an Empyrean. She wouldn't be the Empyrean Glowlight Queen. She would have probably become the god. And that becomes a huge issue. That becomes such a huge issue because she gets killed by Malekith. So we have the idea that also the idea that Malekith taking out the Rune of Death and killing the Glowmite Queen weakens the Godskin's powers and stuff as well. So there are so many. There are just so many problems with putting Glowmite Queen so early in the timeline. It really only, especially with like the Godskins themselves, because then you have to have quote unquote gods that she's killing, and who are these gods that are being hunted, that are creating all these Godskins that then have to be essentially, you know, put into the fringes by Marika and her killing the Glowmite Queen. Right. There's just if that is true, then there are so many other events we have to work out around that and what's going on in the larger like geopolitics of the area for something like the Glowmite Queen to just be kind of out and about doing her thing. And the problem with that is that it's clear that the ancient ruins of Rao are not so recent because they're already these ancient one, it's, you know, it's old civilization, right? And you can argue how old, right? How old is old, right? But it has to be at least old enough that the hornsent have no idea about their own history and culture, that they have to go to these ruins to rediscover it. Like, that's the only thing that really makes sense, is that there's some cataclysmic event which called the systematic collapse of the Rao civilization, which leads to the hornsent being the successors to that civilization, but they have little to no memory of what their history and past was like, right? Like many civilizations over time. But then eventually they reform, create a true society at Ballarat, and then this causes them to start, or maybe even the archaeological discoveries at Rao leads them to create Ballarat because they're rediscovering a piece of their culture and stuff. Eventually, they're finding the divinity of the Bud in the Rao ruins and establishing the Church of the Bud, right? So clearly they also find some signs of the rot influence there, though we don't see any signs of rot that destroyed the civilization or anything, so who knows what's going on there. Maybe it's a element of the rot that was brought up from the ancient dynasties down below, right? Because we know that the ancient dynasty below Liurnia had contact with the rot, right? So it could be just like one of those things that were brought over by ancient dynasty and ancient dynasties and ancient civs having contact, right? But anyway, the idea would have to be ultimately that Rao civilization was destroyed long before the events of the hornsent, let alone of Marika. And the idea that the Glowmite Queen has managed to survive through all that period as just an Empyrean is just, well, that's becoming really hard to believe. The question to me would be if Rao Queen was Placky's wife or some goddess in between her and Marika. Yeah, that's my same question, Baltoy. This still doesn't answer the question of what happened to Placky's wife. Am I right? Is that God's grave marked by the three fingers, Placky's wife? Is that actually the proper god? If so, there's still a question of why she died there or stuff. What does it mean that the two fingers holding the seed of the Erdtree is? Because there's a lot of ways to interpret that could still apply into the whole Placky's wife leaving the Elden Ring and that becoming a seed, which the two fingers, you know, they do some hubbubajoo magic crap that turns that into the beginnings of the Erdtree or whatever, right? And then that doesn't come into full fruition until Marika. Like, there's so many questions about what the process for this was like and what's happening in the events in between so many things. Maybe the Two Fingers didn't even know that Glowmite Queen was an Empyrean at the time. Well, she can't, because it's outright stated that she was an Empyrean chosen by the Two Fingers. So that doesn't make sense then. You can't be an Empyrean chosen by the Two Fingers, and yet you don't know it at the time. It's like, oh, we chose her to be Empyrean. Wait, she's an Empyrean? Yeah, so none of that works. Bro, it's so obvious that the Mask of Tanis is modeled after Placky's wife. Actually, it would be funny if we do a comparison of the statue and Tanis mask. It's like like they use the exact same model as a basis for modeling the statue. That'd be so funny. I think you should look at near Ilm's trees for the Placky wife theory. They seem to have people embedded into them or made out of people. Yeah, we see that, but that can go into the spiral tree stuff and the stuff that's going on with Marika and like the whole Saints with the pots thing. Yeah, there's a lot to question about what's going on with Ballarat culture, because clearly, again, it's all clear that they avoid talking about the Elden Ring because I think it's obvious that if Miyazaki mentioned or brought up the Elden Ring in any of this, it would be so obvious to connect all the dots. So he's purposefully avoiding it. He's just talking about, the Crucible and powers of the Crucible and things like that. He's using a lot of evasive language so he can be able to keep the mystery not so plain and obvious. Yes, I understand your point making, Night Scout, but the problem is that they outright state the chosen by the fingers. You cannot choose someone to be an Empyrean, and it not be known about. Now you can try to make an argument about recognition and stuff all you want in that case, but the idea is that at least the two fingers have to have recognized and understood it from when the person is born, if not like shortly afterwards, right? Again, we don't know if all Empyreans have to be born Empyreans or not, but assuming they do, then yes, then it would have to mean that yes, from the moment the Glowmite Queen was born, she was chosen to be a candidate for God. Also, we have the entire idea that the hornsent themselves were like technically all Empyreans of some type, so. Yes, the fingers are flawed, but again, the problem is we have the lore text telling us that they're chosen, so it's really hard to weasel out of that. It's sort of like you cannot like, there's no interpretation of the language where you are chosen by something and they don't know that they don't know. Like you have to know the subject of which you choose. For the AC destruction, I'm thinking the failed frenzy flame Lord Nanaya has the chord of maybe has the chord of. I'm thinking the failed Frenzy Flame Lord Nanaya has the chord of may be a factor. Okay, sorry, Boltoy. I had trouble reading that for a second. I was like, what? No, okay, now I understand. Would justify the hornsent fear for the frenzy? I agree. It would make the most sense that frenzy is somehow involved, because then that could connect to the whole grave thing, right? Beneath Altus and stuff. Because, again, we have to keep in mind that no matter what, the Rao civilization, by virtue of the Precipice Ruins, we know that Rao bordered and was, like, essentially, like, you know, in between, like, Realm of Shadow and Altus Plateau. So you could totally make a connection between that grave and the three fingers leaving their mark on it. The spinal cord of a former Lord of Frenzy who might have existed in that civilization and led to its catastrophic collapse. Well, it means that choosing could be at some point after an Empyrean's birth. The fingers would have to meet this person. The problem is they are chosen as an Empyrean, right? So they are the ones who are selecting. They're like, you are an Empyrean. This, again, can only happen if the idea is that if we're trying to say that all Empyreans are born Empyreans, then that means that at the time of their birth, that selection process is made, or that decision is made, and it's done by the fingers. You cannot really kind of weasel out of it where it's like, okay, they were born Empyrean, but the it doesn't say, oh, recognized by the two fingers. It was chosen, selected by the two fingers. Okay, so I'm not seeing anything new for you guys on like the actual timeline stuff here. Like anything new to add to, again, specifically to the during the reign of Godfrey stuff, right? Or anything like immediate vicinity of that. We're talking about like really old history and stuff, which again is cool. It's relevant, but it's not the purpose of this stream. And it's past midnight for me now. It's almost 1 o'clock. I need to sleep. Could Farum Azula have toppled Rao? Sure. Again, where I am at right now, chat, is that I have no idea what happened to the ancient civilization and ancient dynasties exactly, which led to their collapse. Was it one thing? Was it a bunch of different things? Was it like some mixture of one main thing, but a bunch of other ancillary things happened? Because as we see with the current situation, there's definitely a case where there's some major conflict, America breaking the Elden Ring, but then there's a bunch of other forces out there in the world who are ready to dogpile on and make the problems even worse, like the Formless Mother with Moog, or the Frenzy Flame with the Three Fingers and all that stuff. There's definitely cases where we could argue that there was some terrible cataclysmic event which happened, which led to the decline and destruction of these great civilizations all across everywhere, and that they just collapsed into old barbaric tribes or whatever that had to rebuild civilization after a certain time, right? And that was a major contributing factor to that was that these other forces kind of came in and kind of added fuel to the fire to was already a terrible situation. But I have no idea where to strike the balance there. Was it Farum Azula invading and destroying Rao themselves? Okay, well, why do we not see any further evidence of them, like, taking over the land? Why didn't they say rebuild, like, or conquer, or whatever like that? Because we have the Farum colonies and stuff, so clearly they're willing to spread and stuff, so why wouldn't they stay or doing so? Maybe it's them, like, just maybe it's because Rao was somehow affiliated with Baal or somehow involved with the Baal stuff or something. Maybe. I don't know. Like, I'm at the point where I think that there's so much vagueness that I am willing to believe almost any possibility at this point. Like, it'd be very hard for me to be like, no, that doesn't make sense. We have to exclude that. I missed it. Did we find the site stating Golden Order was founded as the Erdtree was born? No, we have not. Again, no one's brought it up. I think I'm gonna ask Quaylag or Vati or someone to see if they remember. If you guys find it or have it, or if you guys in the chat who are like just lurking or whatever know about it, feel free to leave it in the comments or throw it at me in the Discord. Check link in the description. You'll find the Discord link on the contact page. So like all of that. Like, I have no idea where it is. Again, this is assuming that I'm remembering it correctly, or that it's right. It's totally possible that whoever wrote that was not getting their lore from Miyazaki. It was just like a marketing tagline, and like it's not actually accurate. Again, I don't remember the exact source where I saw it. I can't remember if I saw it in English or if I saw it in Japanese. Like my brain is just mush when it comes to that thing. I just remember the information. And that it was somewhere on some website or some web page or something, and I can't remember where. That's why I'm trying so hard to try to rationalize a Glowmite Queen that exists before the Erdtree's created. Like the idea is like Marika kills the Glowmite Queen. In the like Marika removes the rune of death from the Elden Ring, has Malekith kill the Glowmite tree with the Glowmite Queen with the rune of death, and then proceeds to create the Erdtree and become the eternal queen god, right? So we would essentially take this stuff here. At the very least, the Godskin hunts. You could argue then the Serpent Rebellion happens later, though I still think they would have to happen in conjunction with each other based on everything we know. But you would have to essentially take these two events and move them up here, right? The problem I have with that is that there is so much that would suggest that these events happen later, and that so much other stuff has to be established. Like, again, the establishment of the demigods and things like that. The establishment of an Erdtree and a culture and civilization. Like, again, just look at the Mesmer stuff. We need to have essentially the entire... Let's ignore this stuff because this is all like doing so. But like just after Marika is here, we have to have Mesmer being born. We have to have Marika and her kingdom repurposing these AC golems from Rao and stuff, right? So these have to be somehow like integrated into the military stuff. We have to have Caria take over Liurnia already and stuff in order for the stuff to happen with the purge later on, right? You have to have the trolls and stuff that are joining with Caria because Rellana's bringing them along. You have to have the Erdtree, of course, has to be created at some point. You have to have all this stuff with the Farum colonists and Misbegotten are enslaved and things. Because only once that land is cleared and the royal capital is established can we have the nobility and the perfumers of the clergy as we know them today to be established. Then you have to have the Great Serpent betraying the Erdtree and stuff, and all this stuff with Gilmira and things to be occurring before Mesmer's purge is happening, right? Because he has to preserve much of this culture and stuff, or have some of this culture occur in order to lead to stuff like his right-hand man betraying him, right? After, helping him in this purge thing, right? Like, there's just so many events and cultural and stuff, and you're trying to tell me that now we have to say that Mesmer's quote-unquote sister, who has a vision of fire, is somehow going all the way back here? Like, we have to believe that Mesmer's birth and his sister would have to be before all of this? Potentially even much of this? At the very least, before all of this. I find that really hard. Like, that really is hard. That's why I'm saying that, the idea that the Glowmite Queen may have been someone unrelated to Marika until she was killed, and then she was reincarnated as Marika's daughter, that's the only way I can justify it then. Because the idea that Marika has all these children... Yeah, just the fact that Marika would have Mesmer and Melina, and Melina grows up to be the Glowmite Queen, would require that that Godfrey and Marika had already met and were already siring children who were the Golden Lineage. And if Marika and Godfrey are already having the golden lineage and stuff, then again, all the stuff with the Elden Ring and the Erdtree and stuff already, like, don't you see my problem here? Like, it just doesn't make sense. It's really hard to justify. America needs some time to meet Alecto and company too, and they seem like they'd have been slave warriors raised with Oh, no. I've talked about this before, Night Scout. I don't agree with you on whatever you think with the Alecto and the Knights and stuff. Like it's clear that Alecto and people seem to come from Celia and their assassin culture and background stuff, and the Nox and the Eternal Cities. You know, through that avenue. I don't think it was something like some slave warriors or something that had contact with America. I don't think that ever was a thing. The only way I can see his work if we accept that Glow Might Queen was not only was Imperium, but actually managed to become goddess and then was betrayed and defeated by America. Yeah, that's the problem. We don't have anything. We only have mention of an Empyrean. That's the biggest problem. Now, the best argument I think you could say for it is the fact that both America is referenced as Empyrean before talking about how her only use for her vassal beast was to, what was it say? Like, he was dedicated to his Empyrean, but her only use for her vassal beast was to seal Destined Death. That's the best argument I can think you can make that, okay, so the events of Malika sealing Destined Death maybe coincide with the Empyrean thing, but it's two separate clauses, and it's very easy to, like, argue, like, otherwise. There's, like, that's the best argument I can think of to help support it. They're still associated with the Eternal Cities. Yolan and Anna seem very similar to them. Talk about knight astrologer stuff and were born in jails to be warriors. Yeah, but they're born in jails, which, as far as we can tell, the jails don't have any direct connection to the Eternal Cities or anything like that. Like, I don't see anything that would make me go, oh, Eternal City connection there. Again, you'd essentially be saying that Nox and Nox or relatives or some relatives to the Nox somehow have these connections to the jails, and then they're giving birth to people who are, essentially living and growing up in these or at these jails as like pseudo prisoners. Like, that, it seems more likely to me that the whole night thing is purely because it's underground where there's no sun. So similar to how the Nox associate the underground with their night because they create the false sky. There's no actual sun there, so they just treat it as like an eternal night, right? It's the same thing with the jails and stuff. So they create these night warriors because they're people who live 100% with no sunlight. But I have to look more into that, so I don't know. Maybe it could be right there. Anyway, so, yeah, like I said, that's the only thing here that I'm like, okay, this still doesn't answer that question to me, and I haven't seen anyone bring up anything that can help convince me that my timeline I have here is wrong. Because keep in mind, Jet, this was the one thing that I was 100% ready to be like egg on my face. I was wrong about this. I was wrong about putting the Glow Might Queen incident so close to the end of the timeline. It should have been up here, right? When we saw like the stuff with Mesmer and the Purge and people were speculating about the Godskin thing, which I'll be honest, I wasn't 100% sold. I wasn't really sold on that. I was like, it doesn't really, like I can see it, but like it's also like it's not really like that obvious to me. Like you don't see any like other like seams or things to show like stitched together, right? So I wasn't 100% grabbed on that. Like, I'm not saying it's wrong, by the way. I'm just saying like I still don't feel 100% sold on that. I didn't feel that way at the time, right? So like, but like with all that other stuff that was in the air and stuff, I was like, you know what? I'm totally willing to be wrong about this compared to my timeline. But then I played the game and I feel completely justified in my entire timeline, which is a very weird, like, you would think I would be super happy about that, but just super weird to me, right? Because like it's now making me have to wonder, like, no, I have to be more wrong about this. Like, there has to be something else that I'm missing here. Like, I can't be, like, there's no way that I'm having this good of a track record. Also, do we have any idea what the corpse America was pulling the string in the trailer was? No, we don't know what that is, except that it somehow has to connect to the Elden Ring, right? So, again, that's where I'm like, okay, maybe if we combine stuff from the trailer with that, like, whole sack thing, and where she's pulling out those strings of gold from, and, like, what's going on with the hornsent and stuff, because, like I said, my current working theory, and again, you consider this a crack theory. I don't personally think it's a crack theory per se, but it's definitely like a very, like, I haven't thought this thing through nearly enough depth, right? So I'm never going to be writing this in analysis. I'm just saying this right now until I've actually gone through that process. But my current impression is that I think Marika sold out her village. She essentially went to the hornsent, or like somehow she came in contact with the hornsent or whatever, and they started working together. They were in league with each other, and she basically sold out her village to all the stuff that happens at the village. And then she, in order to create the Gate of Divinity and all those corpses we see at the tower and stuff, and around, of course, the Gate of Divinity and everything, and she was the one who was essentially responsible for all that. She used all that in order to create the Erdtree and the Shadow Tree by extension, the Shadow Tree is in its own dimension, which we call the Realm of Shadow, but, you know, it's not the Realm of Shadow as we know it. It would essentially be just the Shadow Tree by itself in this separate Shadow Land, like this mirror world type thing, right? She creates the Erdtree, right? So the hornsent and everyone's so happy. So the hornsent are their own independent civilization, but America goes off with Godfrey to establish her own kingdom with the Erdtree on the Highlands, right? And it's separate from whatever is happening with the hornsent. They're basically living in parallel in peace and prosperity for whatever reason. And then, somewhere down the line, after all of this was established, right? Then Marika decides she's going to betray the hornsent and cast them in the Shadowland and hide away Mesmer, and basically force him to prove himself by, you know, committing to this purge and all this for the rest of his life or whatever, right? And none of that makes sense to me unless between the events of Marika and the hornsent essentially being like, oh, we're all good buddies, and Mesmer's purge where she wants to exterminate all these hornsent, Melina rises up as the Glowmite Queen. That is the only thing that makes sense to me. Because what do we have? Essentially, Marika gives birth to 2 children. They both have a quote-unquote vision of fire. So they're both born as Empyreans, essentially, would be the argument. Or at the very least, something that could potentially become Empyreans in the future, right? Mesmer has his flame. Melina has hers, right? Then Melina grows up, and under, whether by the influence of the 2 fingers or whatever, what have you, she essentially decides she's going to take over her mother's realm. And she does all the stuff we say that happens here, right? With the godskins and the serpent and stuff. The serpent betrays Marika and decides to join up with Melina and try to, you know, take over and stop the Erdtree, destroy the Erdtree and Marika's reign and, you know, her dominion of life and stuff, and create this, you know, age of death. Marika thwarts this, and as we know what happens with Melina, she becomes weird spirit reincarnation thingy, who's being hidden away in a tower, essentially, right? But after this, and Marika taking out the Rune of Death, creating the Golden Order as we know it, and becoming the Eternal Queen, now she has an impetus to, one, want to try to get rid of the Gate of Divinity, or at the very least seal it away so no one can use it without her say-so. One, hide away her son, because her son is both a threat to her and her kingdom, as well as potentially others because of his snakiness, because of the snake betrayed thing, like that. We see what happens with the Omen, right? So the idea that Marika may have foreseen that coming before, and wanting to, preempt that makes sense. Like, she wants to protect her child by keeping away, but she's also afraid of her child, so she wants to keep him in there away from potentially harming her and stuff. So he has to continuously prove himself by keeping the Gate of Divinity closed and not using his vision of fire to potentially burn down the Erdtree, right? That only makes sense if there was this Glowmite Queen incident that completely changed the status quo from here and here, right? All this stuff, right? To what we get here. Yeah. Do you think Blackie's God is still a factor in the creation of the Erdtree? Sorry if this was brought up earlier in the stream. No problem, Boltoy. I have no idea. I have to redo my... This is the one area where I will say that I could be completely wrong there, and I'd be totally okay with being wrong there. I'm fine with that. But I have no idea... With the introduction of the idea of the 2 fingers being the first shooting star to fall upon the earth of the lands between, with the introduction of the information that the 2 fingers are directly involved into the idea of the Erdtree, and the idea that the Erdtree itself began with a seed, again, because we all know the Elden Ring is ultimately at the core of the Erdtree, and the Erdtree cannot exist without the Elden Ring, right? Like, we've seen this, the Elden Ring decides everything when it comes to the Erdtree. The Elden Ring and the Erdtree are basically, like, you know, synonymous. I don't know, then, where that fits in with all the other stuff with the hornsent and the trees and stuff. There's also a lot of questions about the finger runes and stuff. Why do we have 2 finger runes outside the one that Count Ymir has for Metter and stuff like that? Why is there the one that's underground, but then there's the 2 others above ground, one near, conveniently, Marika's village, and the other down south, you could argue conveniently closer to Farum Azula, right, with Jagged Peak and all that stuff. So, is that all tied into the whole god thing? Maybe. There's so many factors there, and that's why I'm trying to focus specifically on the Marika and Godfrey timeline, because this is the most important stuff. Once we get that, we can start working back and working forward from there, because this is the stuff where we have the most data to work with. Okay, I still don't see anything else. Okay, guys. It's almost 1 o'clock. I have been streaming for God knows how long. I'm sure you guys enjoy it immensely, and I thank you all who have, you know, joined me this entire time, but, like, we need to wrap things up now. Like, I have been streaming for almost 4 hours. Oh my god. This was not as long, this was a long stream. I was not expecting it to be this long. Metro arriving before the Elden Ring is also a bit weird to me. Yeah, the only thing I can think of is that either A, the disparity of the world is not connected to the Elden Ring like you think it would, based on everything else we know about the Elden Ring and everything that's involved in related to disparity. Especially considering that literally the destruction of the Elden Ring is synonymous with the melting and destruction of disparity in the world and all that stuff, as we see in the Frenzy ending, right? Or the idea that the idea is that the greater will, before he even created the disparity in the world he wanted to create a agent who would be able to then communicate that to the beings which the greater will knew would come to exist once he enacted his molding of the one great into the world as we know it. That's the only thing I can possibly think of, is that the greater will knew from the very start what it was doing when it was creating the world as it was, and that it would be sentient races, and it simply wanted to make sure that first and foremost, before anything, that an agent who would be able to witness everything that was going to happen and then communicate that to the creation after the fact. If that makes sense, right? Like, you essentially have the idea that you create a witness to all of your own actions, to act as, like, you know, and then have that witness communicate it, your will, through its observation of what you do. When do you think Meter stopped getting signals from the Elden Ring? Or I think you mean the Greater Will. Yeah, Greater Will. You correct yourself. Thank you. Ymir could date when the fingers broke. I don't know. Again, that's something I'd have to think about. Like I said, there's a lot. Like I said, there's so many factors here, chat. A physical checkmark, per se? Yes, essentially, right? Like, the idea would have to be that, again, like I said, if we are trying to think about what is the greater will's intention, right? So you have this one great, this rock earth, right? This globe of rock, right? It's just this rock that represents primal existence. There is nothing more fundamental than this which exists, except for that which does not exist. And that existence, that the thing which is abstract, the imaginary, the intangible, the non-existent, that the thing which exists in the absence of where what does exist, right? So where there is no rock, there is this darkness, which is the greater will, right? That there's this outer space, right? That is the greater will. And there's been so many connections with the lampreys and stuff, with this darkness, the space, and the cosmos, and this idea of, like, an ocean and water and stuff, right? This is very, you know, this is something that's always been in Miyazaki's, conception of the world, of his world building for his games, right? We've shown that in Dark Souls, we've shown that in Bloodborne, and now we're seeing it again in Elden Ring. So I'm not surprised at all by any of this, but there would have to be this idea then that somehow, somewhere, the darkness of the greater will, essentially it, which is as fundamental as the one great itself, decides it's going to take the one great and mold it using this power of shadow/gold, because again, this idea that shadow seems to be the shadow of the greater will, its darkness, seems to be the fundamental building block from which gold is spawned, along with all the other stars, and that essentially it sends down a shooting star as the two fingers to act as its witness, and then it sends down the golden shooting star, which would presumably then create the lands between as we know it. You know, the crater we see. I don't know if we attribute the idea of the lands between as a crater still works anymore now that we have this idea of the realm of shadow in the center. But either way, there have to be this idea that the lands between as we know it is formed by by the combination of Metter being sent down first, and then the Elden Beast as becoming the Elden Ring next, and that creates the world as we know it and all the life and stuff therein. Again, this also goes with the idea that the use of Ymir, who calls us children of the greater will, as quote-unquote stardust. Again, the term stardust means debris of the stars. That could be very abstract, because he considers glintstone to be or at the very least, he associates glintstone with stardust. Again, star debris, which makes sense, because, stars crash down, and then, like, what's left in their wake, they break apart and crash, and the glintstone is their pieces of them, right? They're the amber, the pieces of the stars, which are, their own living things, right? So then the same thing then could be said for people and stuff, that if you think about it, the Elden Ring crashes down, and its gold and stuff becomes the life, is the primordial life which exists in all things. So therefore, all living things which are born from dragons, which were the first life forms, which were, the gold embeds itself into the rock, and from the rock it forms this rock entity known as a dragon, and that dragon begins giving birth to other things like dragons or whatever, and then, like, from there we have other living things which spread out in the family tree and become all the different flora and fauna which spread across the world and stuff. Well, I should say, sorry, not flora, just fauna spread across the world. And that same gold is also spawning trees or whatever, because apparently it can just do that. It's spawning trees and all the different tree species and stuff that we end up getting from there as well. So you have this idea that the Metter, the mother of the fingers, is witnessing all this, and is witnessing this creation, and as a result, because everything derives from gold, namely the gold of the golden shooting star, the Elden Beast, which became the Elden Ring, therefore we can say that we are in fact stardust, quote unquote. We are in fact, in a way, a form of glintstone, right? And this is, again, goes back to how Ymir seems to have left, even though he was Rellana's sorcery professor, and so oh, that's something we can add to the list here. Where is it? Rellana repurposes Gilmira, Shadu. Rellana joins Mesmer. Ymir joins Rellana. There. So, like, Ymir presumably joins Rellana because he's a sorcery professor, and, all the loyal vassals and stuff to Rellana go and join her when she decides she's going to go off and join her future boyfriend off in crusading, right? So it only makes sense then that Ymir comes there, but that's when he discovers the truth about the two fingers and stuff, and eventually breaks off, because clearly, again, we have to keep in mind, this is very early in Liurnia's history, so this is probably before the primeval current studies were banned too, right? This was probably, like, at the very least, it was like when they were first banned, right? So Ymir was probably very immersed in that primeval current culture, and this idea of trying to find the origin of the stars and stuff, and once he discovers the greater will is the darkness of space from which all the stars come from, he is the primeval, the greater will is the primeval current, then suddenly, all bets are off. Ymir's now all about fingers and studying the fingers and the greater will and becoming the proper agent of the greater will as the mother of fingers, and starts framing everything around the idea of, like, okay, yeah, we all want to become stars, but, we don't want to become, like, just any random star. We want to become stars connected to the greater will through, like, the Elden Ring and the two fingers and all that jazz, right? So it's very clear that, like, that's where he's shifted his frame of reference now because of all those influences. Fingers stillborn being mushrooms also have some weird implication for fungi plants evolution. Oh god. The term isn't exactly no, I'm not going to say that because I have to check the exact text because I don't remember exactly how it's doing so, but it's not exactly stillborn. I remember being like, "Oh wow, I wasn't expecting that," to how they compared to how the English words it, but it might be similar enough for you guys that I don't want to say that right now. Anyway, point is, chat, I am yapping. You've caught me yapping. You keep on making me yap because it's so easy to make my stupid ADD brain go off on a tangent. But it's past 1 o'clock now. Please let me sleep. We're gonna end things here. Thank you all of you for showing up. I want to again I guess congrats isn't the word, but I want to give my special appreciation to everyone who has thrown in their hat into the ring on these different ideas and stuff, and throwing in like evidence and stuff, and helping supplement me for my failings as I go through this random like off the cuff like tangent for almost 4 hours or whatever it is. So like again, thanks so much for that, and yeah, see you guys later. I don't know what we're gonna be doing tomorrow or whatever. Maybe we're gonna do some honkai. Maybe we're gonna wait till next week or whatever, right? But like again, I hope this was useful and informative and stuff. I can't wait to continue evolving my thoughts on this shit. But for now, I'm going to focus on my Dark Souls and Bloodborne stuff and make this the side piece now. Because you know what? Dark Souls and Bloodborne have been on the side for far too long this past year. So, yeah, see you guys later. Thanks so much. Bye.